IB Nation, welcome back to another episode of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It is Friday, February 7th, and it's Friday. You guys know what that means. It's the Friday free-for-all mailbag. It's the opportunity that Brian and I get to sit down and answer your guys' questions that you guys submit in the chat. It has nothing to do with the premium message boards. It's just any questions that you guys might have thought of over the course of the week through some of the shows that Brian and I have done or other shows that have gone on here at Irish Breakdown. If you have questions on them, now's your time to put them in the chat. So make sure that you label all the questions that you have with a little MB or a little mailbox emoji, and we'll be sure to get those answered in the order that they come in. As always, super chats get bumped to the top. And I have a feeling with as crazy of a week as this has been, as crazy of an off season as this has been, there's going to be a handful of, not just a handful, a bunch of really, really good questions. So I don't know about you guys. I'm always happy when it's Friday. Also a little bit more of a fun Friday. Today's my mom's birthday, so I'm going to try to make it up to Elkhart this weekend and take her out to dinner or something with it being a crazy weekend. But it's going to be a good one. Brian, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, man. I'm doing great. I'm ready to rock and roll. It's been the wild off season continues. Obviously, we have an update on the message board about James Blanchard and him not taking the job at Notre Dame. Some of the reasons behind it. It's a very unfortunate situation. I'll just say this: that my respect for James Blanchard has grown from what I know about the reasons why he turned the job down. And I'll be paying very close attention to the job he does at Texas Tech moving forward. But so the search continues. Obviously, Notre Dame also has to find a running backs coach. So it's going to be this offseason's only going to get more crazy, Trev, only going to get more crazy. But I'm excited to sit here and do the mailbag. Obviously, talk about anything Notre Dame related, anything recruiting related, anything college football related. And, of course, we have a super chat to start off with, Trev, from Tyler Evans that doesn't talk about any of those things. He talks about the NFL. So let's get rocking and rolling.
Super chat from Tyler Evans. Thank you, Tyler. What do you think of the 2025 Hall of Fame class? And it brought me to tears when I saw Shannon tell his brother he's in the Hall of Fame. Yep, I saw.
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead, Trev.
I was going to say, overall, I like the class. It was cool that Antonio Gates got in as well. But seeing Shannon present the nomination to Sterling was really, really cool. Especially, I mean, it was so well-deserved. And obviously, Shannon's speech was very iconic when he got inducted and gave his speech about how he's
not the best player in his family.
Mm-hmm.
That was awesome.
Yep. Yeah. So it was really cool.
I totally on board with all four of the guys that were picked. I think the only guy that I would have even had any kind of question about would be Eric Allen. Would be the only guy that I would even necessarily say, like, is Eric Allen really, like, is he in the Hall of really good, or is, you know what I mean? Like, that would be my only kind of question mark. But it's not even like, okay, if I had to pick somebody that I'd have to push back against, he'd be it. You know, he was a good player especially for the Eagles, but I don't know that I would say he was necessarily a Hall of Famer. But you know, he had a lot of interceptions and played for a long time. My bigger thing with the Hall of Fame class, I mean, Jared Allen's absolutely belongs in the Hall of Fame, in my opinion. Antonio Gates is one of the greatest tight ends ever played, if not the. I mean, there's people that will debate for him being the greatest. I don't really care about the greatest. I mean, it's some people want to say it's Gronkowski. Some people want to say it's Tony Gonzalez, Shannon Sharp. You could go back old school and all those different things. And look, he's one of the greatest. And and obviously Sterling Sharp belonged in well before. It shouldn't have taken him this long. For the same reason, a guy like Gale Sayers got in and Terrell Davis got in. Like, he had a brilliant career. It just was shortened because of injuries. I mean, he caught 18 touchdowns in his last season. Like, I mean, he was in his peak, but he belonged in. I'm glad he's in. He was a heck of a player. Like, younger people that didn't get a chance to see Sterling Sharp, I would encourage you to, YouTube is your friend. Check it out. He was a heck of a player. Heck of a player. My bigger thing is I thought there was a couple guys that didn't get in that I thought should have gotten in. I think Luke Kuechly should have been a first ballot Hall of Famer, to be completely honest with you. I'm shocked he didn't get in. You know, you're talking about a guy that I know he only played 8 years, but he was twice the defensive player of the year in his career. He was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of the years he played. He was all first team All Pro. The 2 years he wasn't first team All Pro, he was second team All Pro. He had just over 1,000 tackles in 8 seasons. Think about that. 75 tackles for loss, 9 fumble recoveries, 7 forced fumbles in his career, 18 interceptions in 8 years for a linebacker. Like, he was a heck of a player. And so to me, he should have been a first ballot Hall of Famer. I know he only played 8 years, but other guys that play 15 years weren't great outside of their best 8 normally. It's like they accumulated stats because of certain things. Like Emmitt Smith's the all-time leading rusher because he played way longer than anybody else. But was his stretch of greatness better than what, Barry Sanders' stretch of greatness was when he walked away? No, I don't think it was. So that's kind of my takeaway. There's a couple guys, Trevor, that I thought should have got in, and that would have been more of my pushback. There's going to be a lot of talk, obviously, about Eli Manning not getting in, and I think Eli Manning is a Hall of Famer, but I think that first ballot is meant for the great of the great. That's kind of how I look at it. And so, like, to get in on a first ballot, I don't know that I would say someone like Eli, who had a great career, a Hall of Fame worthy career, should be first ballot. And I know some people are like, look, if you're not good enough to get on the first time, then you should be a Hall of Famer. I don't really personally look at it that way. I think there's kind of tiers to being a Hall of Famer. I think first ballot should be kind of reserved for the John Elways, the Joe Montanas, the guys like that. The Tom Brady will obviously be first ballot Hall of Famer, and Peyton Manning was the first ballot Hall of Famer. It's like the true great ones. And I don't put Eli in that category. He was a great Hall of Fame quarterback, but I wouldn't put him in that category. So I think he'll eventually get in. I don't think he just should have to wait too long. I still don't understand how Torrey Holt's not a Hall of Famer. That one still blows my mind. I don't know how Reggie Wayne's not a Hall of Famer. Darren Woodson's another guy that I was a little surprised didn't make it. But those are some of the guys that I thought were a little bit like, that's interesting that guy didn't make it. And then Mike Holmgren's a guy that didn't get in, which I was surprised by. He still hasn't got in as a Hall of Fame. I believe he won 2 Super Bowls, right? Or once he won one for the Packers, and then he went to another one with the Seahawks, and then also was a great assistant. So I thought he'd have a shot to get into. But those guys, the snubs are more of the story for me as far as any feelings one way or the other, besides just, well, yeah, no doubt. Sterling Sharp, absolutely Hall of Famer. Jared Allen, absolutely Hall of Famer. Like I said, Eric Allen's the only one that I would somewhat question, but I'm also not to the point where I'm like, oh my God, that's how that guy did. Not to that degree. I thought it was, and then Antonio Gates is a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Is he first ballot? Was this his first crack at it?
I'm not sure.
Because what's the rule for when are you eligible? I know for Major League Baseball,
it's after 5. I'm pretty sure.
I know that's true for baseball. I wasn't sure what it was, and he finished his career in 18. So it looks like Antonio Gates was not a first ballot Hall of Famer, but he should have been. He was a great player for a long time. Anyway, so good question, Tyler. That's yeah.
Yeah, it was a good way to get us kicked off. Really good way.
Jason Rose says the people that didn't vote Luke Kuechly as a Hall of Famer should be stripped of their vote. Doodles have had a fun. I get it. Don't disagree. I keep thinking that Mike Holmgren was the Seahawks coach when they beat the Broncos in 13. That's why I always keep thinking he won 2. That was Pete Carroll, obviously. But for some reason, I still keep projecting that onto Mike Holmgren because I remember him on the sidelines of the Seahawks Super Bowl where they were on turf, but it was not that one. It was the loss to the Steelers. So I think that's where in my head I'm confusing it. But yeah, there's definitely some guys in there that I'm like, I don't know how that guy's not in. Like Torrey Holt and Reggie Wayne are 2 where I'm like, how's that guy not in the Hall of Fame? So, but yeah, otherwise I think that it's a good group. And you're starting to get into that point in time where it's like, man, I was like a grown man when these guys were playing in the end of, you know what I mean? Like in older, like not even like I was 18 when that guy's career ended. Like, no, I was like in my 30s, and 40s. Yeah.
It is cool now that players that are getting inducted into the Hall of Fame are players that I watch now growing up. Because before, when I was younger, I always paid attention to who was getting in, but it was guys that played before I was able to really watch and pay attention. So it's really cool seeing it now. My whole thing with Luke Kuechly, and I am on the same page as everybody else. I think the thing that bothers me is I think there's something to be said about longevity and how long you play, but I think your impact to the game should be weighed more heavily, in my opinion. There's a lot of people kind of in the Eli Manning discussion. It was actually over my bachelor party. I got into a huge debate with all my buddies about this, and we were very on one side or the other, because one of the guys said that Phillip Rivers is a no-brainer first ballot guy. And I was like, based on what? Based on the one AFC championship appearance he hadn't lost in it? I don't understand. He never played in a Super Bowl. I don't think he ever had an All-Pro, but he just played for 16 years. So I think in the same light, that's worthy of being in the Hall of Fame, because I think he finished top 10 in passing yards, something like that. But I think there's some people that put a little bit too much emphasis on, well, look at how long he did it, which is incredible in its right. But what did you do in that time? So that's how I look at it too. And then with Eli Manning's case, he played almost as long as Phillip Rivers did and has 2 Super Bowls and 2 Super Bowl MVPs. So, if I'm splitting hairs here, both I think should be in it, but yeah, that's me.
Phillip Rivers, I have questions about whether he's a Hall of Famer, but I think part of that might be I just dislike him incredibly so. But you look at the numbers and Phillip Rivers put up longer numbers. He played longer than Eli did, number one. But, there's got to be something said for, are you a winner? I think the thing that hurts Eli is he threw it. I mean, there were some years as a veteran, he threw a lot of picks. But so did Phillip Rivers. I mean, in the 2016, he had 21 picks. He had 2 years with over 20 in an era where you shouldn't be throwing over 20 interceptions. But neither of them to me are first ballot guys. And that was my thing about Eli, is I don't think Eli is a first ballot Hall of Famer. And same with Ben Roethlisberger. Of the 3 from that draft class, I think the guy that you could make the best case for being a first ballot Hall of Famer is probably Roethlisberger, to be honest with you. I don't know that I would vote any of them as first ballot guys, but I mean, Roethlisberger had more yards than any of them. He, like Eli, won 2 Super Bowls, correct? I believe he won 2, or did he because he beat the Cardinals, and then he was the quarterback when they beat the Seahawks, I believe, correct, with Jerome, and then he lost to the Packers. So he went to 3 Super Bowls, Roethlisberger did, I believe.
Yeah.
So he can match Eli in Super Bowl titles, but he also had more yards because he played longer. Eli retired when he was 38 and started when he was 23. Roethlisberger played until he was 39 and started when he was 22. And so he's got more touchdown passes than Eli. He's got more yards than Eli, and he can match Eli in Super Bowls. So I'd say he'd be the one that I would make a case for being a first ballot guy. But honestly, I don't know that I'd put any of those. Again, the numbers are great, but there's great players, and then there's all-time great players, right? I mean, you look at some of the guys from the 80s and 90s, and there's a lot of great players, but were there a lot of John Elway's, Joe Montana's, and Dan Marino's? I don't know that I would say that there were. And I would even put Dan Marino, with all due respect, on a notch below John Elway and Joe Montana. I mean, there has to be some level of separation between greatness, you deserve the Hall of Fame, and then what are the elite of the elite. And that's how I view some of these guys. So, I don't know that any of those guys were. But to your point about Luke Kuechly, yes, he only played 8 years, but it was brilliance from the moment he started till he ended. It was pure brilliance. And I don't know that anyone that played line, there aren't many guys that had an 8-year stretch like his 8-year stretch. And so I don't care if what they did before or after their best 8 years. I care about when you were there, as long as it wasn't like he did it for 4 or 5, then you could be like, yeah, I mean, he played 8 years. That's a long time. And he was a dominant player. So I felt Luke Kuechly should have been on there. Of course, I'm going to bring up Elway Palo. He was the GOAT, man. I don't care what anybody says. If I can start a team, I'm taking Elway, man. You know this. Yeah, I just, you know what I mean? Like, there's a difference between Tom Brady and Eli Manning. They're both, to me, should be Hall of Famers, but one should be in first. Now, Eli beat him twice. Have you seen that? Did we talk about this yesterday? The thing that Eli
did. The freestyle that Eli did.
Funny. I've really enjoy his commercials. Like, did you see the one where he's like, "You're not going to destroy my dream again, Peyton. I'm 44." It's just like, he's like, I had a dream, and then my dad and brother made me follow this quarterback thing. It's like he's so disgusted his family made him play quarterback because he always wanted to be a kicker. It's hilarious. He's really funny. And you wouldn't expect him to be, because he's kind of got like this he's kind of goofy, but he's really funny. I really find him funny. So, but yeah, there's Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, and then there's Eli, Phillip, Ben, all Hall of Famers, but there's just different levels to it. Good
Agreed.
question, Tyler. Good way to kick us off, man. Good way to kick us off.
Question in here from ND. It just means more. Pros and cons. Jackson Dart versus Riley Leonard. Who would be the best fit in Notre Dame's offense? Who is a better pro prospect?
Well, I'd take Riley over Jackson Dart, and that's no disrespect to Jackson Dart. Like there's this phrase when it comes to debating quarterbacks where I do value the notion of someone being a winner. A winner to me is not someone whose record is this and this, because you could be a very mediocre quarter. With all due respect to Brian Griese, Brian Griese won at Michigan. He was a good point guard, right? But he wasn't the driver of Michigan's success. There were years where quarterbacks were way better than Brian Griese at Michigan, but they didn't win titles. Why? Because they didn't play on as good of teams as the one he played on in 1997. So, but it's more about, are you the driver behind success? And when I look at Riley Leonard versus Jackson Dart, Riley Leonard to me had a much better ability of being able to put a team on his shoulders and say, we're not losing today, and I'm going to make sure that we don't lose today. I know that the Northern Illinois game is an example you could push back on, and I totally get that. But as we've said before, he got hurt in that game and couldn't play his game, and Notre Dame didn't use him to play his game. But, Jackson's going to put up way better numbers. He passed for a lot more yards and put up, average this amount of, I think it was like 10.8. Let me pull it up here real quick. 10.8 yards per attempt, 180 quarterback rating, 495 passing yards, and all that kind of stuff. And that's all fine, and obviously he's the numbers are better than what Riley's are. But I look at it, Trevor, and I'm like, but Riley accounted for just as many touchdowns as he did. Actually, let's see. Riley had 37, so he had 5, 6, 7, 8. So he had 29 in the regular season, and then 8 in the postseason. So they were about the same in touchdowns. Jackson had 32. So the numbers are obviously would suit Jackson Dart. I like Jackson Dart. I think he's a good player, but I think some of that is like the system. And when I watch him in some of the games that they lost, it's like, yeah, but you didn't do what you needed to do to put your team on its shoulders and go make those plays. I mean, they had multiple chances late in the game against Florida, and he kept turning the ball over. I mean, like, whereas in Notre Dame against Ohio State, you're like, give Riley Leonard one more possession. Like that's why we were always so also bummed when they gave up that 3rd and 11 conversion, because you're like, they weren't stopping Riley Leonard in that offense in the second half. If they'd have got the ball back with another minute and a half left, they were going to go down and score. I don't know if they'd have got the 2-point conversion, and they may have lost in overtime, but they were going to go down and score. That's how I felt about it. And so I don't see him as being that kind of guy. Now, he may be a better pro prospect than Riley. I'm sure some people are going to believe that. He's more of a natural passer and all that kind of stuff. But I'm not an NFL scout, so I don't want to sit here and pretend that I know what the NFL scouts are going to believe. I'm just going to tell you, if I had to choose between the two, neither of them are first-round picks, and I'd probably go with Riley Leonard just because I feel like I could work more with Riley, and win with him. But if somebody wants to just go bring in a Jackson Dart and develop him too, I'm fine with that. I think Jackson's a good football player. I'm not anti-Jackson Dart. I just feel like with Riley Leonard, I know what I'm getting a little bit more, and I know what I'm going to get from week to week. And he'd probably be who I'd go with. But I don't think either of them are guys I'm bringing in right away as my franchise quarterback. Like, they're more second, third round picks to me than they are first round picks. In my, just again, and I say this as a fan of the draft, not as someone pretending to be a draft expert. That's not I've admitted for years, Trevor, that's not my area of expertise. So that's my opinion. So I know why people will think Jackson Dart's a better pro prospect because the throwing, but again, I still say that part of that is I need to be a great pro prospect. You got to show me that you can do it when it matters. And I don't know that I would say he necessarily showed me that in his career. Put up numbers.
Sure did. I mean, to break down the first part of this question, who's the best fit for Notre Dame's offense? I mean, I think it's Riley Leonard. We said it throughout the season that Riley Leonard was probably the only quarterback that could run that offense. Now, with that being said, the offense then had to be tailored to Riley Leonard's skill set, so there was a little bit of adjustments on both sides. But as far as a pro prospect, to me, it just depends on what team you go to.
It's fair.
Because if I'm an offensive coordinator in the NFL and I need somebody to run a West Coast style drop back 35 times a game, like a Cincinnati Bengals type offense, I'm probably not drafting Riley Leonard because it was something that he didn't show that he could do consistently at the collegiate level. I'm not saying that guy's Jackson Dart, but in pertains to these two, if I had to pick one, that would go to Jackson Dart. But if I'm running something similar to what the Baltimore Ravens run, what the Washington Commanders run, what they asked Jaden Daniels to do, yeah, the Eagles, I'm taking Riley Leonard because of his athletic ability and his legs, and he has shown that he can be a passer at times. So again, I'm with Brian. I'm not a draft expert by any means. I watch the NFL every Sunday, and you just talk about different fits of who would go where and who would do better where, and that's kind of my breakdown of it. Aiden Benami, 1 to 100% chances Gerby Lambert overtakes Mr. Emil Wagner at right tackle.
Okay, Aiden. Mr. Emil Wagner is a poster on the board. That's Ronnie. All right. Don't steal Ronnie's name and give it to somebody else. Look, at right tackle, I mean, is there chances that it happens at some point in time? I'd put over 50%. Chances that it happens to start the 2025 season, I'd put it 10%. I don't think there's any chance in heck that Joe Rudolph is going to give anyone a chance to beat out Emil Wagner at right tackle. I don't think that there is. My thing, and we had this debate on the message board the other day, I'm not saying that they should bench Emil Wagner in favor of Gerby Lambert. All I'm simply saying is people denying that there should even be a competition, I think, are very misguided. And Emil did some really nice things in his first year. He had some issues in his first year as well, like most redshirt sophomores who take over at a place like Notre Dame and had to face the D-line talent that Notre Dame faced this year. There's going to be some moments where you struggle. He had issues in the postseason against some really good defensive lines. But that doesn't mean he should get benched and you just put in the more talented guy just immediately for no reason whatsoever other than that guy's just more talented. My point is not that they should bench him. My point is that simply nobody along the offensive line, and that includes Charles Jagasaw, that includes Ashton Craig, and to a degree that also includes Billy Schrouth, although I'd say Billy probably is the most settled player on there because he doesn't have a Gerby Lambert type of talent behind him, with all due respect to Sullivan Absher and some of those guys. But no offensive lineman, and really nobody on offense, even like Jaden Greathouse, outside of maybe Jeremiah Love, has done anything to lock down like, yes, you're our number one guy. I'd say Jay Love and Jaden Greathouse are the two closest. I would put Billy Schrouth third and Emil fourth on that list. But when you've got someone as talented as Gerby Lambert, he should absolutely be given the opportunity to compete for that job. Having said that, he can't just be more talented than Emil. He has to outplay Emil. And I don't know if he's going to be able to do that, but he should get the opportunity to do that. And that's what should happen, but I don't know that that's what will happen. I think Joe Rudolph seems kind of set on the tackles from last year. And honestly, Emil Wagner deserves the ability to say, you better really outplay me. Really outplay me if you're gonna start over me.
Yeah. I mean, he was the only offensive lineman that started all 16 games in the entire lineup. So that has to count for something. That's why I tell people a lot that I think Emil Wagner was the most consistent from a health standpoint. Things that he had to improve on to be expected from a first-year starter. So it's kind of the way that I look at it. As long as there's somewhat of an honest competition, and Gerby Lambert's given the opportunity to compete to start somewhere along the offensive line. Same with Emil Wagner, because I don't think that any offensive lineman is set outside of maybe Schrouth, or with the departure of Pat Coogan, Ashton Craig, if he's able to come back healthy. But even then, you have guys behind him. So
yeah, if
you
Joe
never know.
Otting comes out there and just outplays him all spring, then I'm giving Joe Otting that shot. Or if like I'm like, look, I got to start Jagasalt left tackle, and I really like Absher and Tarek battling at right guard. Ashton's not back healthy. Let's give Anthony Knapp a shot to play some center until Ashton comes back, and you move Anthony Knapp there, and he just looks great at center. But to your point, Ashton is still – I don't think you should lose your job because you got injured. But when you get injured, you also don't have a vice grip hold on your job either. You should get first crack at it, but if somebody outplays you, they outplay you. That's how it should always be. But you don't just play a guy because he's more talented. Not that Iden is saying that. I'm just simply, that was been something you got to put Gerby Lambert in there. I disagree with that just as strongly as I disagree with the notion of people saying that it's ridiculous if you even consider not playing Emil Wagner. I think both of those are very off base. You give him the chance to compete. You make Emil earn it, because that's also going to make Emil better. Because if Emil has to legitimately battle with Gerby Lambert and Gerby has a good spring and Emil beats him out, that means Emil made improvements, the needed improvements needs to do. But to just say, well, yeah, you're our starter, don't worry about it. That is that really the kind of competition that you want to have? I don't think so. Just like if Jeremiah Love went out this offseason and just every day was just eating pizza and hanging out and not working out and all this just because he thinks he's the guy, he's going to find himself on the bench. Fortunately, that's not who Jeremiah Love is. But I'm just simply saying, like, even if you're a great player, you should always have to continue to work to get better and keep your spot. And if guys start just being told, oh, yeah, you're our guy, don't worry about it, that's when complacency can set in, intentional or not. And that should never be the case, especially when you've recruited the type of young talent that Notre Dame has at tackle the last couple of years. Like, look, you can say whatever you want about Joe Rudolph, and I think he's a good coach. I don't think he's a great coach. He's definitely got some issues, but he didn't accidentally recruit Gerby Lambert and Will Black and those kind of guys to the roster. Like he Styles Prescott, he's recruited well, and they're pretty loaded there, which means you should have competition every year, and guys should have to go out there and work to get better and prove themselves every year. That's what great teams do. You think Nick Saban would have just told one of his offensive linemen, like, hey, don't worry about it. You're locked. You got the spot locked down because you played good football last year. You weren't elite, but you played good football. So I'm not going to play this 5-star, 6'7", 325 athletic, dancing bear behind you. I'm not going to play him just because you were solid last year. No, you got to earn it. Now, this guy better outplay you if he's going to, really outplay. It's not like if all things are equal and, Emil's slightly ahead, I'm not going to leap Gerby in there. He's the better player. Then you go for it. That's just how it should always be at a place like Notre Dame.
It also reduces the probability that you're going to have players that succumb to complacency, which I also really appreciate. That's another reason why one of those Saban teams, one of the many, were always so good, is because you always had that next 5-star, 4-star guy that was just kind of chomping at the bit to get on the field. So it's another reason why it's always an open competition when you go into the offseason at most positions.
Response to somebody said, and I don't follow, I don't think the number of championships is relevant to whether a player be voted into the Hall of Fame. First of all, it should absolutely be part of the conversation. Like, what are you playing for? Did I sit there and say that Phillip Rivers shouldn't get in because he never won a Super Bowl? I never said that. But you played 20 years. You couldn't just Marino even got to the Super Bowl once. But then he said Brian must have not seen too much of Marino because many feel he's the best QB ever. I literally know of no one other than Timeout and Dan Marino who think that he's the best quarterback ever. I know of no one that thinks that. Like nobody. So I don't. So many feel like who? The Marino family, Dolphins fans, like who thinks that? First of all, and all I said is he's not on the same level of John Elway and Joe Montana. I didn't say he's beneath Ken O'Brien. I said he's not on the same level of John Elway and Joe Montana. Did I say he's not a Hall of Famer? Of course I didn't say that. So I don't mind answering for things that I say, but I'm not going to have people push back on something that I didn't say. So yes, championship should matter as part of the criteria. If Terrell Davis would have had the same career he had in the regular season, but without the postseason success, I highly doubt he's in the Hall of Fame. Highly doubt he's on the Hall of Fame. If John Elway didn't win the last 2 Super Bowls and he went 0-3 in the Super Bowl, should he have still been a Hall of Famer? Absolutely. Jim Kelly went 0-4 in Super Bowls. Is he a Hall of Famer? Absolutely. But to sit there and say, but if I have 2 guys and one guy, they similar stats, and one guy won 2 titles and one guy doesn't, then, I'm going to take the guy that won championships. Because this kind of winning thing kind of matters. But it can't be your end all be all, because part of that is what kind of team did you play on? Like Archie Manning didn't win a lot of games in the NFL, but he was a heck of a player. He played on some awful teams. Matt Stafford didn't become a winner when he joined the Rams. He was always a winner, but he just happened to play on some really crappy teams. But a lot of times he elevated the Lions to be better than they should have been, in my opinion. So it wasn't a shock that he went over there. So championships should absolutely be part of the conversation, but they're not this ultimate trump card, meaning you get in because you won 1 or 2, or you don't get in because you didn't win any. But it should certainly be part of the conversation, no question about it. But I never said Marino wasn't a great quarterback, and I never said he wasn't a Hall of Famer. I think he retired as the all-time leading passer in the NFL, correct?
Yeah.
Like yards and touchdowns. But I don't know. I don't know a lot of people that would be like, if I had to pick between the 2, John Elway and Joe Montana or Dan Marino, I'm taking Dan Marino. I don't know a lot of people that think that. So I don't know, maybe your crew does Timeout, but mine doesn't. And I don't know of him. And I saw a lot of Marino. I also watched Dan Marino get beat in the playoffs every time he played John Elway. And let's not pretend like he had better teams than John Elway had. Let's not forget that either. So, and I'm still mad at Dan Marino too, because the one game I saw John Elway play in person, freaking lost to the Dolphins. So I have some bitterness. I'll admit that. I have some bitterness. But he got him back in the playoffs that year, though. They beat him 38-3 in the playoffs that year. So I'll take that. I'll take the L in the regular season when I'm there live against a playoff win in the postseason where it led to the Broncos winning another Super Bowl. So
on the stage that matters.
Yeah, exactly. I'm still a little bitter about that. Yeah. Although Dan Marino was a better actor than John Elway. Yeah, he was a better actor. That was his cameo in Ace Ventura was hilarious. Yeah. Yeah, he was good in there. All right, let's get back up here and get back on track. We've got salty Virginia peanuts.
The Irish are in winter conditioning. What is the schedule, content, and goal of this time?
Well, right now, Salty, your time is being spent with the strength coach. That's primarily it. I mean, you should always be doing film watching. You should always be studying yourself. The film watching you're doing right now is kind of going back over your season. You're getting some correction from coaches like, hey, you need to work on this, this, and this. And then you go back and watch film and you look at it and you try to apply it. And then you work on those things. But right now it's just about just getting your body, reshaping, you're recovering and getting over the long season. And that is something I'm very curious about, because the turnaround between when the season ended and when winter workout started was way faster than normal. Normally Notre Dame's done by January 1st and winter workouts will start late January. Well, this year they were still playing in late January. They were playing at January 20th I believe was their last game. So I'm very curious how Notre Dame handled that time in between. I don't know. They're gonna have to come up with something different. But that's Ronnie Reeves just said, I didn't know I was in the running for right tackle. That's awesome. Well played, Ronnie. Well played. But that's something I'm interested to see. But right now, it's just about rebuilding your bodies and getting ready for another long grind of a season. And they'll start practice sometime in March and go a month with that. But the goal this time is really just about recovering and laying a foundation now for moving forward. I do think they have to take into account Lauren Lando and his staff of this team just got done playing. Was it 2.5 weeks ago? I mean, so less than 3 weeks ago. So that needs to be considered. So I would assume they're doing that. Like a lot of the videos I've seen of the workouts are the freshmen and transfers. I don't know if they're just working out at different times, but that's what I'm seeing. So I wonder if maybe the guys that played are getting a little bit extra time to rest and recover. I would assume that would make a lot of sense. And I'm also curious to see when Notre Dame starts their spring practice, because the spring game being April 12th is like, that's really early. So are they going to start spring practice like early March like normal and then take spring break off? Do they wait till after spring break to start and then just go for just go for a month basically without the little break in between? I don't know how they're going to handle that. That'll be interesting to see. But this is a unique offseason for Notre Dame and Ohio State, and Penn State and Texas are all the 4 teams that had to play a week later than most. Normally in the past, there's only 2 teams that played until like the 8th or 9th or 10th. This year there's 4, and then 2 more played until Tuesday. So that's kind of where I'm at. So Dayon just said that they start, and I know Dayon knows some people in the program. He said they start lifting Tuesday. So that would lead me to believe that the veterans have not, which is kind of what we were thinking when we were watching the workouts of the newcomers and the transfers. So that tells me they're giving them some time off, which is really smart. So I'm glad to hear that. Thanks for sharing that, Dayon, because I do think they needed to make sure that they're going to give them some time off. Anthony Solomon asks, when is Brian and Trevor, when is the Way Too Early Top 25 show? Because of kind of all the things that happened this week with Chris Ash and then the GM and all that kind of stuff, we decided not to do that. We'll do that next week. So I think next Tuesday is when we'll do that, Trevor. So that's when that show will be. So good question, Anthony. So yeah, that's kind of what happens in the spring, in the off season. Sometimes is a lot of news happens, and Deland McCullough leaves and all that, and it was a busy week. So we'll do that next week. And if for some reason something comes up early in the week, we'll just move it to Thursday. But we definitely plan on doing that next week. Thank you for the reminder of that, because I'm sure you're not the only person wondering that when we're going to do that.
Question in here from Notre Dame. It just means more. If Coach Rudolph comes out of spring practice insisting that Knapp be the starting left tackle, at that point, would you, as the head coach, call him in to have a conversation?
Only if the offensive coordinator felt I needed to do that. Meaning like the offensive coordinator would be the one that should say, nope, we're not doing that. We're going to go a different direction. And Joe Rudolph was like, nope, we're doing it my way. Then I'd say, okay, like not to be a snitch or anything, but hey, Marcus, just so you know, this is what's going on. We need to have a sit down. I'm not saying any of that happened. I'm simply saying this is what the structure should be. If the higher ups were that way. Now, if Marcus Freeman was dead set on this is what we got to do, then he would then call him in. But I don't know that Marcus Freeman has really kind of had that type of deal where he's going to veto a bunch of starters. He trusts his coaches to make decisions. There have been times where I do know that he has stepped in and said, hey, should we rethink this? But I don't know that he would just step in that way unless he was dead set about it. I would consider it. No question about it. But I think that would be more of if Mike Denbrock had a problem with the decision and he felt it needed to be done to make sure that they were making that move, it would probably go in that direction. I wanted to respond to something that just came in the chat. So this is something I want to respond to.
Joseph Barrett says, Brian, what did you think of Chad Bowden's comments at the USC introductory press conference? Thought he took some cheap shots at Notre Dame.
I think people that thought he took cheap shots at Notre Dame either A, didn't listen to his full quote, or B, were looking to be offended. I didn't take any, I had no issue. And look, yes, I knew Chad a little bit. I like Chad. I think Chad did a great job. But I don't care if you do a great job. If you act classless on your way out, then I'm going to hammer you for it. But there's a lot of people that would take the comments he said, it just meant more, and then hit period and be like, see, he's just like Brian Kelly. No, listen to the entire question. Okay, the entire question was, or the entire comment was, it meant more to me basically to come to USC as someone who grew up in this area, who grew up rooting for USC. It was no shot at Notre Dame. It was like, it's like if you were coaching it at Georgia and doing great things, and your dream coming up was to coach at Notre Dame and you took that job, would you not talk about how badly you wanted to be there and how it was such an honor to be here? That doesn't mean you hated your time at Georgia. It just means like, this is my dream job. So I had no issues with it. I think people are just looking to be mad about something. Like if you leave Notre Dame, it's like, we're not the mafia where, you can't leave here. I mean, you're going out in a body bag. This is not how it works, man. Chad felt there was something better out there for him. Okay, I don't agree. I don't think being at USC is a better opportunity right now. I would have waited until like Lincoln Riley's gone and the next coach comes in, because I'd have concerns about your longevity there. But if this was truly a dream opportunity for him and they offered him a ton of money, sure. The only thing that you could say that I had an issue with was the comment he made where he said Notre Dame did everything they could to keep me. And I thought that came across as like Notre Dame kind of begged me to stay. But I don't think he was intending to take a shot at Notre Dame. I just felt like that was the only thing that I thought was unnecessary, because I know that Notre Dame was not, they didn't match the offer that USC gave him. Like Notre Dame decided it was, look, we love the job he did. I do know that Notre Dame, there was conversations, and this isn't coming from Chad or anyone on his side. There were conversations about him staying. But I think both sides kind of were at the point where it's like, look, you've got a great opportunity that you want. We're good moving on. There's, we appreciate what you did. You did a great job, but you go do what you got to do, and we're going to keep trucking along. I don't think there's a situation where he left taking shots at Notre Dame, and Notre Dame was like, F you, you did a bad job anyway, which I think a lot of people are trying to turn this into. And so I don't think there's anything wrong with what he said. And there was nothing – I have no problem with Notre Dame's decision to say, hey, we're going to go in a different direction either. I think it works. Chad did a phenomenal job while he was here. People, they all felt it was time to go, ready for a new challenge. Go for it, man. Go for it. So I've seen this a lot, and I wanted to respond to it. And Trev, you and I talked about this a little bit yesterday after the show. So I went a little bit out of order here, but I saw that one pop up, and I wanted to respond to it.
I think some of it, too, is just the destination that he went to. Like, if he was from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and went and took a job and was working with PJ Fleck and was, it means more to be back home, I don't think anybody would have cared. I think it's the fact that it's USC.
And I'm okay with people being pissed that he went to USC.
Yeah.
But don't try to start some drama about, he's taking shots at Notre Dame. Trev, I have no issue with you or anybody else having a problem that he picked USC. I don't even have a problem with people like, dude, why you keep flirting with other teams every offseason? No issue with people having a problem with that. None. I don't like the fact that he went to USC. I don't like the fact that he went to USC when he did. I don't like it. But he didn't take a bunch of shots at Notre Dame on his way out the door. I didn't take and I listened to it because I was going to be like, man, I hope he didn't do that. That would be such a crap way to go out. And I was kind of like, listen to it, expecting to be pissed off. Like, come on, dude, you're better than that. Why would you do this crap? Based on how people responded to it. And then I actually listened to the comment. I'm like, this can't possibly be what people are upset about. There's no way this could be what people are upset about. Not grown-ups. There's no way.
It was the same thing before the national championship when that quote came out of Jeremiah Love when he said, we want Ohio State.
That's a great point.
It's the same thing. The same exact.
Yeah, when you cut it off at we want Ohio State, you cut it off there, then sure, you're going to sound – it sounds like he's like calling it – no, he's like, they're the best, and we want to play the best. There's nothing wrong with what he said at all. Nothing wrong at all. But people like to, they like to start stuff and all that kind of thing. And yeah.
Question in here from Wyatt Kirwan. It was
Kerwin, I
unfortunate.
think, is what that
Kerwin?
is.
Wyatt
Mhm.
Kerwin. It was unfortunate to have so many injuries in 2024, but how crucial were the snaps that so many young guys got because
Oh,
of them?
Wyatt, it's huge for the team. And Trev, it's not even just the snaps they got as like the guys that played, but the guys that went from scout team to second team got a lot more meaningful snaps in practice during that entire time.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, Armo Mukum didn't play a lot of snaps in games, but he was with the first team defense all year and got a lot of valuable, snaps and opportunities that way. Carson Hobbs, I don't know if he would have got as many practice snaps with the first team as he did, if not for Benjamin Morrison's injury, which is going to put him in a situation where, he might compete for a spot this year and a rotation spot and that type of thing. So it's huge. It's huge. You got so much more opportunities. You learn from your mistakes. You find out like, okay, I thought I was pretty good, but I kept getting beat on this, this, and this. I got to work to improve that part of my game. And I don't know that you have that same feeling if you're just kind of down there running the scout team every week. So, man, Wyatt, is huge, huge that they got that. And the whole team got basically 3 weeks of, actually, it's really about 4 when you had the extra days, almost 4 weeks of extra, about 3 weeks. 3 weeks of extra practice time. It's like Notre Dame and Ohio State basically are going to have like 2 spring periods worth of practices when you consider the extra time post Indiana, because that's game 13. So games 14, 15, 16, that whole week of preparation for that. Then you get your spring period. You know what I mean? So like that's a ton of extra reps for a team that was, again, you and I've talked about, it's not going to be a very big Notre Dame draft class. It's not because they lost a bunch of dudes who can't play. It's because they didn't lose that many guys. They lost very important guys, but they didn't lose a lot. And so there's a lot of guys coming back. They're going to get a lot more reps this season because of that. And it's going to pay huge dividends, Wyatt. Huge dividends.
Makes the young roster you have not as young.
Yep.
Makes it really exciting.
Yep.
Question in here from Muhammad Abdi. Brian, going back to your coaching career, what made Mount Union a dynasty in D3 elite coaching or players?
It's neither by itself. It's both. Here's the thing about Mount Union, and I played against Mount Union, and the team that I coached, we were 11-1 when we went to their place to play them in the third round of the playoffs. We had beaten Chris Creighton and Wabash that year. We had beaten Hardin Simmons in the playoffs down in Texas. They had a receiver that went and played with the Chiefs. We beat the number 2 seed in our bracket, Thomas More, 41-0 at their place. We were really, really good. And there's actually some of the kids from that team are coaches now. And I saw one of the former players was actually a guy that was supposedly in the running for the head coaching job at Ohio. John Hauser, great player, super smart player, least shocking player I ever coached. That was, and I didn't coach him directly. He was like on a staff I was part. I'm like, yeah, that guy's going to be a great coach someday. You just kind of knew. And the OC that I worked under, Scott Isfording, has been an OC in the MAC the last like decade plus. Like we were a really well coached team and a really talented team, and they thumped us 49-21. And it was one of those games, Trevor, where at the end of the game you're just like, I don't know what we could have done different. So they were way more talented than we were. They had a left tackle named Larry Kennard who was going to sign with Ohio State, but had some great issues and ended up going to Mount Union. 6'7", 295 at the D3 level. Their starting D end was Matt Campbell, current head coach at Iowa State, who transferred from Pitt. They were getting those kind of transfers. We weren't getting those kind of transfers. Chuck Moore was a great running back. That Dan Pugh was at fullback. They moved him to running back next year, and he won like the D3 Heisman. They were just loaded. Pierre Garçon was on that team, or he might have came later. Actually, now that I think about it, let me go look at Pierre Garçon. He might have actually come a little bit later than that, he was a little bit later than that. But they were absolutely loaded, Trevor, just loaded. But the thing that they don't get enough credit for is they were also really well coached. They were fundamentally sound. They had good scheme. and there were teams that they had that won titles later that weren't nearly as talented as the team that I played against or coached against, but they were still winning because they were incredibly well coached. So I think it was both. Yes, they had some advantages that a lot of people didn't have, but they kind of earned those advantages. I mean, they would recruit, and they were smart. I don't like that they did this because I think this hurts players, but they would recruit so many players. They would recruit top players. They'd recruit like 5 stud running backs a year, knowing that those guys were going to play, but they made sure they didn't go to Wittenberg, didn't go to John Carroll, didn't go to Ohio Northern. And so they'd practice 2 teams. They'd have their varsity team and their JV team, but their JV team would be every bit as big as their varsity team. It was nuts how big their rosters were. And so I think that obviously they had the best teams. They had the best rosters every year, but they were also a pretty well-coached football team during my era of coaching. I don't know about now, the last 10 years. I haven't really paid a lot of attention, but when I was when I was a player and when I was a coach, Mount Union was the team to beat. And I saw them play live multiple times. Actually, the title game where they lost to St. John's in, I think it was 2003. I was actually there in Salem, Virginia that year because I was interviewing for the OC job at Carthage and up in Wisconsin. And so I was on the road recruiting, and I had talked to the head coach, Tim Ruck. I think he's passed away since then, but he was like, "Hey, I'm going to be in Salem." He was part of some coaching committee, so he had to be there in Salem. He's like, "Why don't you meet me here? We'll watch the game. We'll talk, and we'll interview you for the job." So I think I was like 3 years removed from college at the time. So, but like I was there watching that game, and St. John's beat them, but like that was just outstanding. I mean, their head coach was an all-time great as well. Hall of Fame coach, had like over 800 wins as well. That was really well coached football, and Mount had a lot of talent, but they were also a really well coached team, and I would never want to take away from that. Yes, they were more talented. Their roster was way better than our roster, but they were a well coached team as well, and I always give them credit for that. And super chat.
Super chat from Will Falk. Thank you, Will. Thanks so much for what y'all do, Brian and Trevor. Of course. Could you explain where the money comes from for paying players now? Are NIL collectives going away? And how do programs raise this money now?
Well, Will, I don't know all the answers to this. Here's what I do know. Collectives aren't going completely away, but they're going to become far less prominent because the reality is what's going on now is schools are now responsible for paying the rev share because essentially it's a revenue share, and they've arbitrarily decided that this is how much the revenue share is going to be. I think the number's a little too high, to be completely honest with you. I think the percentage that they're giving for the players is too high. It's greater, I believe, from what I read, it's greater than the percentage like NFL teams get of the revenue to pay their players. But it is what it is. So you're basically have to be accountable. You have to budget for it. Number one, you have to say, look, this is what we have to pay players. So when we're putting a budget together for the season, we've got to account for that. That means a lot of your fundraising is now going to go towards that. So you don't have to just pay the revenue you get for your TV contract. And here's, 20 something million of it. That's the thing. It's like, so a Big 12 team that makes 40 something $million has to pay $20 million to their roster. And it's not the entire roster. It's like, it's student athletes is what it is. So it's not just football. But there's a lot of those questions. Like, so there was a ruling recently that basically said that this rev share is included under Title IX, in that I'm trying to remember who said it. Who was it that said this? Like, what entity said this? But basically, like Title IX applies to this rev share, which means you have to somehow give as much to these. And I think that's going to get challenged. So a lot of this, we still don't even understand how it's going to get paid out. And I don't think, with all due respect, I don't think that I'm trying to think this way. I don't think that the 20 million or whatever should go towards that aren't producing revenue on average. I don't think the women's basketball team should get as much money as the football team or anywhere close, unless you are a sport that produces revenue. I don't think that's how it should be. I don't think male sports, I don't think that men's soccer should be getting a cut of the revenue share because they're not producing revenue. I mean, the whole point of a rev share is you're paying them this money because they've produced X amount of billions over the years and they haven't gotten their fair share. That's only been 2 sports, primarily college football and men's basketball. Now, there are some women's basketball teams that produce a profit, just like there's some men's basketball teams that don't. But as an entity, women's basketball is not a net driver of revenue to college sports. Most programs pay more out for salaries and travel and uniforms than they actually make on those sports. That's just the fact. Just like baseball is not a revenue driving sport. Men's soccer is not a revenue driving sport. This isn't a men's sports versus women's sports. There's only 2 sports, period. They happen to be men's sports that are revenue drivers for the vast majority of schools, and that's football and men's basketball. That's just a reality. And if it came to the pass at some day that women's basketball was producing more money than men's basketball, then they should get a bigger piece of the pie. That's how it should work. If you're a revenue producer, then you should get a cut of the revenue. If you're not a revenue producer, anyone in business will tell you you should not be responsible for paying money to a revenue share to an entity that's not creating revenue. I mean, that shouldn't be hard, but, this is politicians making these decisions, and they're not exactly known for being savvy business people and spending money wisely. So that's just the reality of it. And so I don't know how that's going to go because I don't know yet, and schools don't know yet who's going to be getting paid. That's part of it too. And how much do we have to pay to certain sports? But what you're going to see is a lot of the money from that like Notre Dame's fund is already done. It's over. It's not a thing anymore. And a lot of those collectives, you're going to see that. Now, some of these collectives are still going to exist because they're still going to be doing some of the enticement stuff for recruiting. And a lot of the big money is now going to go towards, because like that's the struggle that you're in, is we have to now pay $20 million to our student athletes that are here, but we still need money to go out and get those student athletes to come here. And that's going to be the challenge because recruits are still going to want theirs. And so you're going to still see some schools that are going to focus on that. I don't know what that means for Notre Dame, to be honest with you. I really don't. I really don't know what that means, and I don't know how it's going to work. This is the thing with so much of this. It's happening so quickly. So quickly that I think a lot of people don't like, how's this going to work? I don't know. We're kind of flying by the seat of our pants here, trying to figure it out. And that's happening in a lot of athletic offices. And Notre Dame's no different. But some of this stuff I really just don't know. I truly don't.
Super chat in here from Andrew Burke. Thank you, Andrew. Brian, hypothetical question. You're the new head coach of a college team with an unlimited budget. Name your dream staff: coordinators, position coaches, strength staff, and general manager.
I don't know. Who are my coordinators? I mean, how do I not say the Notre Dame coaches and still expect them to answer my calls or respond to my texts? So I'll go Mike Denbrock on offense, but if I couldn't have Mike Denbrock and he chose to go somewhere else because he was getting a head coaching job, I'd probably go with Will Stein at Oregon. I love his offense. Defensive coordinator. That is a really interesting one. Trev, do you have anyone that you would, as defensive coordinator, do you have anyone that kind of pops in your mind as a defensive coordinator? I mean, there's a lot of good coaches out there. I'd have to think about this one. I like the job Tim Banks did at Tennessee this past year. I thought he did a really nice job. Jim Knowles did a really good job at Ohio State. The D-court, he's not, I wouldn't know that I'd be ready to hire him just yet, but I'll say this, he's on my radar. The guy at Indiana's on my radar. I need to see a little bit more. Joe Rossi would get strong consideration for me. I'm a big Joe Rossi fan. And I'll tell you what, he's another guy that I'd like to see one more year out of. But I thought D'Anton Lynn did a great job at USC this year. When you consider all the stuff he had to deal with, I thought he did a nice job getting that defense turned around because they were abysmal the previous few years. So he'd be in my conversation. Strength staff. I mean, if I couldn't have Lauren Landau, trying to not get in trouble here, I would go with David Ballou, who's at Alabama. I'm a big fan of him as a strength coach. He was at Notre Dame for a while. I think he's excellent. Position coaches. Mike Mickens is my DB coach. There's no question about it. D-line coach, that's a good question. I really like the guys at Penn State. I think they do a great job coaching the D-line at Penn State. Great job coaching the D-line. Linebackers coach, Max Bulla. Receivers coach, Mike Brown. I mean, O-line coach, I mean, he already probably hates me, so I can go. I don't have to pick him. I'm not sure who my O-line coach would be. I'd want to interview Chris Watt, that's for sure. I mean, look, here's the thing you guys have to understand about position coaches. There's not, like I've said about running backs coach. Tony Alford's my guy. I would hire Tony Alford. I know the job he's done. I'm familiar with the job he's done. He's recruited to Notre Dame. But, like, is Tony Alford the only running backs coach that could do a great job at Notre Dame? No. Is the guys that I might mention the only guys that can do a great job coaching that position at Notre Dame? No. There's a lot of good coaches out there. So somebody just said, would I look at Jeff Brom as OC? I'm trying to be realistic and respect Andrew's question. Jeff Brom's not turning down that job. Otherwise, I'd be like, all right, cool. My OC is going to be Jeff Brom. My DC is going to be Kirby Smart. You know, my D-line coach is going to, you know, I mean, I'm going to have, who's the guy at Georgia Tech? The head coach at Georgia Tech, Brent Key. He'll be my O-line coach. I mean, you know, it's like Deion Sanders is going to come coach my corners. Mike Mickens will coach my safeties. You know, I mean, come on, you know, like I'm trying to be realistic here. But Brian Brom is I don't know how good of a coach Brian Brom is because he's working with Jeff. I mean, I don't know how. It's kind of like Phil Petrino. Remember him back in the day, Bobby Petrino's brother? I don't know how good of a coach he was. He was always, because his best years were always working with his brother, who I know is a great coach. Paul Petrino, excuse me, is what his name. So I don't know about Brian Brom. I mean, I know he's got a good reputation, but I don't know enough about him to independently to say he'd do a good job. So I mean, there's a lot of good coaches out there, honestly. And I would want to interview several people. Even if I think I know a guy, like I'd hire this guy as my OC. I still want to talk to a couple of guys that are doing some good things and see if there might be a better fit for what we're trying to do. That would be one. Be one.
I mean, I guess if I could answer this question unrealistically, I think that'd be a lot of fun because, to be honest, before you said that, that's how I took it. I'm not even going to lie. So, I mean, I would go.
I'd hope you'd never lie to me, Trevor.
No, I mean, that's how I took this question. I would go, gosh, I still love Mike Denbrock as an offensive coordinator. So I would do that. And honestly, I would do whatever it would take to keep Al Golden there because I loved Al Golden. That was the best 3-year stretch in Notre Dame defense that I've seen from one coordinator. It's been a lot of fun. And then position coaches, I would go, if we're sticking with the unrealistic train, I'd go Lincoln Riley as my quarterback's coach, Brian Hartline as my wide receivers coach. I'd bring back Harry Heedstand as my O-line coach. I would just have Mike Denbrock as the tight ends coach still, DB's coach. I would have Mike Mickens overseeing everything. I mean, yeah, that's immediately where I went. I was like, dream staff with an unlimited budget. We'll see what happens. Hey, Lincoln, do you want to come in and make $10 million a year as a quarterback's coach?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Who's your recruiting coordinator?
Oh gosh. Marcus Freeman. I don't like.
There you go. There you go. That's a good answer. That's a good answer because you're the head coach, you know, and you got an unlimited budget. He's like, no, I don't want to work for you. Okay, here's $20 million. All right, cool. I'll come work for you.
Yeah, I mean, unlimited budget, man.
Yeah.
I don't know how much we'd have left for NIL budgets, but we'd have the greatest coaching staff of all time.
Unlimited, baby. It's unlimited, so you can do whatever you want. Yeah, that's a good one.
Super chat from Fightin' Mike 87. Thank you so much for the super chat. I measure any new strength and conditioning coach by the performance of the team in the 1st of November and then the health of the team through the second full season. Should I change my approach given the extended season and the college football playoffs?
No, I think I think the best way to evaluate a strength coach is how they perform late in the season. That's extremely important and valuable. I mean, you don't want a guy that they're great in November, but they always lose 2 games in September because they're just not ready. You need both, but I'd rather have a guy whose teams are peaking in November than a guy whose teams peak in September, because that's part of the timing of the offseason is to build them to really start to hit their stride early in the season, but really then be at like full go middle, late in the season, and then just maintain the rest of the way. But I don't think there's anything wrong with that. The question is, once you get to November, that's when you really find out who the good coaches are. And then, of course, being able to maintain that in December and in January, it's a little bit easier in those last 4 games than it is in November, because in the last 4 games, you've got a lot of time in between. You've got 3 weeks for Notre Dame, for example, between the end of their season and their playoff game. It's like almost 3 full weeks. That's a good recovery time. You look at you had 9 days between that and then the next game. And then you had 11 days between that and the title game. So it's a little bit easier than those really quick 1-week turnarounds. So it's still, if your team is going to be in really good position in November, then you're probably running an operation that's going to allow you to be good in the 3 to 4 postseason games as well. So I think that's a good way of looking at it. And then that's going to be the key moving forward. And then there's other things like, what do you see from development of each position as the players progress through their careers? Do you see a lot of guys that start off well, but then don't really get any better? Do you see a lot of guys that really take off in their last few years? Do you see certain types of injuries are limited? Those are all parts of the evaluation of a strength coach. And so overall health of the team is part of it. But you got to look at, okay, what's the overall health? And is there like a rash of knee injuries from year to year to year to year? If there is, then you got to think about, is there an overworking going on here that's just, weakening certain parts? If you see consistent shoulder injuries that like beyond normal, then clearly there's a disconnect there. It's not so much about they had that one bad year and then the next 2 they were fine, and then another bad year. That's part of football. But if there's consistently, you're just having higher numbers of injuries, and those are things you can only measure over a period of time. You need some time to really experience that. Now, that doesn't mean Marcus Freeman and the staff and all the people involved in strength conditioning and health and all wellness and all that stuff shouldn't be looking back to see if there's things they can do to fix that and address that if there is something that needs to be addressed. But it just doesn't mean that it's not happening. And so that's my take on that.
Yeah, the only other thing that I evaluate for a strength and conditioning coach is how, and this is more on a smaller scale, but how does a team progress throughout a game? Because is it the adrenaline in the moment that's kind of carrying you through the first quarter and a half, 2 quarters? And I think that Notre Dame's performance in the national championship, I mean, even after giving up the 3rd and 11, the pads were still popping on the final 3 plays Ohio State had before kicking the field goal. You start to see, is there a fall off? Or on the inverse, do they have an issue with how quickly they start games? What's the pregame routine like? Are practices too tough on Wednesday, Thursday? Does travel schedule need to be different? So I think all those things are on the table too. It's more on the micro scale, but all of those things are fair evaluating tools for sure. Aiden Benami, what's a good nickname for the 2026 season with Madden and KVA at linebacker?
I can't think of anything that's going to not get me demonetized. I'm not even touching that one. A, I'm not good at that kind of stuff. And B, it's like, no, I'm just sorry, Aiden. I love it. I'd like to hear what you guys think. What would you guys in the chat have as a good nickname for them for the line? For the 2026 season with Madden and KVA at linebacker, what would you guys have as a nickname for the linebacking core next year? I'd much rather hear what you guys say. I'm not creative when it comes to that type of stuff at all. And so I'd rather hear what you guys have to say. So I then ask the question. You guys go in the chat. Go ahead and put that in there. So, somebody just said MK Ultra. That's actually really funny. Do you know what MK Ultra is, Trevor? Okay, do some research afterwards. It's something related to the CIA, but it's really funny. I like that one, Zerk Knight. That's really good. That tells me you're not a conspiracy theorist at all if you don't know what that means. So But that's a really good one. Yeah, in the chat, I'd love to hear what you guys. Tropic Thunder. So, hey, Roger Dodger, you're first time ever I've thought about banning you, man. Come on now, don't give me that stuff. Don't give me that mess. But yes, see this. Some of the names in here is exactly why there's no way I was going to touch this question. So, yeah, good one. Look at Iden trying to start some problems. I can't believe you'd do that, man.
I would go something with hair, something that has to do with the hair.
Yeah, there you go.
Iden Benami, were you guys surprised Coach Brown got an NFL interview and offer?
No, he's very highly regarded in coaching circles. Very highly regarded.
Salty Virginia Peanuts, when the playoffs expand, what changes, if any, would you make to the format?
That's a good one. And I won't talk about what I would love to see be the playoff format because we're just talking about realistic expansion. So I won't dive into how I think it should go. So here's some things that I would do you see Lauren Hamilton's?
I was thinking this.
Yeah. So changes that I would make, I would honestly not expand the playoffs. But if they're going to expand it, let's just say they're going to expand it and they go to 14 teams. If I was going to expand it, I would just say go to 16. I mean, if you're like, I think 14 does, like 12 makes a lot of sense because you get the 4 buys and then you play 4 games and then you're in your quarterfinals. 16 is just, to me, it's too much. But if you're going to do it, just like 14, just go to 16. And then I would just have all the first round games be at home, all of them. And then you could, quarterfinal games, you get back to doing kind of what you did this year. Because there was 8 teams in the quarterfinals, just like there would be if everyone in the, so get rid of the first round buys, get rid of all the things, just go to 16 and just do that. And then let your top 3 seeds just annihilate the 16, 15, and 14 seeds every year. Just have fun. If you're going to go to 16 and everybody in the plays in the first round, then you don't have to worry about automatic seeding rights. It's like, look, yeah, you get in because you won the league, but you're not automatically getting the top 4 seed because you won your league. So if Arizona State got in the playoff this year, and what did they end up ranking, Trevor? Like 13th or 14th, something like that. What did they ended up ranking in the college football playoff rankings? I know they're actually ahead of Clemson. The Clemson was the team that was outside of the top 12, correct? Am I remembering that correct? Let me go look at the final college football playoff rankings. Give me a second.
I think Clemson was ranked ahead of Arizona State. I think.
No, Clemson was 16th because Arizona. That's why Arizona State got the bye and Clemson didn't. So Arizona State was ranked 12th and Clemson was ranked 16th. And that's why Arizona State was ranked as a 4 seed and Clemson was the 12. So you'd have had SMU get in, you'd have had Boise State get in, Arizona State not SMU, sorry. Boise State would have got in, Arizona State would have got in, Clemson would have got in because they were the 16. And then, okay, you got in. You had an automatic bye because you won your league and you're the 16 seed. Arizona State, you got an automatic bye. You got an automatic bid because you won your league, but you're going to be ranked where your ranking was. So you're the 12. And then I would say if my rule would be, honestly, in that case, I'd just get rid of automatic bids. I mean, if you're a conference champion and you can't be in the top 16, you don't deserve to be in the freaking playoff. You don't. And so I would get rid of that. But your seeding is wherever it is. So, and if I was going to give automatic bids, I'd give them to, I'd look more into different formats. But I would go 16 teams, first round playoffs at home stadiums over a 2-day period, 4 games one day, noon, 4. I mean, I don't think you can do that. You'd have to have it over 3 days, basically. But that's what I would do. I would go 16 teams, go 1 through 16. No automatic bids, no automatic guarantees to conferences, none of that stuff. I would just make it as pure as, that's basically what the FCS playoff is like. They get a certain number of teams in. At least it used to be like that. D3 when I coach, it's different now, but like you had the top 32 teams got in, and here you go, and that's how it would be. So I would make it as clean as possible. Personally, I would not expand, Trevor. I don't support expansion. I don't think there's 12 teams that are in the playoff ever that have a legitimate shot to win a championship. 12 is too much. My preferred format is go back to the old bowl system with the old bowl tie-ins, make the Rose Bowl the Big 12, Pac-12 champ. I know, just in theory, I know you can't do that because there's no Pac-12 anymore. But that kind of thing where it's like the old bowl tie-ins, and then after the bowls, pick your 4 best. It will have you'll have separation by then, because a lot of these teams will play each other, and you'll have separation by then, and then you pick your 4. That's what I would do, but that's never going to happen. But if you're dead set on expansion, then just go to 16. And then just make it clean. 1 plays 16, 2 plays 15, 3 plays 14, 4 plays 12, 5 plays 11, 4 plays 13, 5 plays 12, 6 plays 11, 7 plays 10, 8 plays 9. And then the winner of 8-9 plays 1, and so forth. The 1-16 winner, and so forth and so on. Just make it clean. But they won't do that because that makes too much sense.
I just don't like the reasoning for some people wanting the expansion because of, well, what if teams 13 and 14 could have made some noise? Look, they could have a 40-team playoff, and it's, well, what about teams 41 and 42? I don't think there's any reason to expand it. I liked 12, but at the end of the day, to Brian's point, what he said before is just if it's going to make more money, it's going to make more money.
Even if it cheapens the game, which it will. It will. All right, here, let's get somebody new. Here we go.
Question from PJC1122. Since the start of the Brian Kelly era, what 2-year stretch of defensive recruiting classes do you think were the best? And the same question for offense.
23 and 24 on defense. Yeah. Think about who you added in the 23 and 24 classes. Defensive end, you added Boubacar Traore, Bryce Young, or defensive line in period, Armel Mukam, Logan Thomas, pretty darn good defensive linemen. Your linebacker classes in those 2 years were Drake Bowen, Jaden Alsbury, Preston Zinner, Kingston Vilama Asa, Bodie Cahoon, and Teddy Rizak. Your cornerback classes were Christian Gray, Micah Bell, Leonard Moore, Carson Hobbs. Your safety classes in that period of time were a Don Schuler, Bronte Johnson, Luke Talich, who's you got as a walk-on. So, your recruiting at those positions was pretty good. There were some that I would say is better parts of it from 24 and 25. So, like, the DB recruiting was 24 and 25 DB recruiting was better than 23 and 24. But I think 23 and 24 was significantly better in the front 7 than what 24 and 25 was. But if you wanted to argue 24 and 25, I'd say go for it. Prior to that, offensively, I think your best case could be probably 12 and 13 or 13 and 14. Or no, actually, I'd say probably like 11 and 12. Because 12, you were short on numbers, but you added some impact players. But in 11, you had Aaron Lynch, you had Stephon Tuitt, you had Ishaq Williams, you had some really good players. There were always holes, though. And that was always a problem of Brian Kelly's tenure. There was always like holes. So there'd be years where you'd have a great front 7 or great defensive line recruiting, and then you'd be completely short at other positions. And then there were years where they would be great in the secondary, but then be short in other positions. And I think 13 was, I think you'd have to, before this recent stretch of 3 years that they've had on defense, I think you'd have to include the 2013 class somewhere, with Jalen Smith and Max Redfield and Cole Luke and that group. So that's why I'm trying to remember who they got in the secondary in 11. I know they got Josh Atkinson, the late Josh Atkinson. Was Dan McCarthy in that 11 class? Because I've said this before, Trevor. I think Dan McCarthy, if not for injuries, would have been a dude at Notre Dame. He was someone that people raved about during his tenure. there, but he just couldn't stay healthy, and he was really good before that. But like defensively in 11, you had Ishak Williams, Aaron Lynch, Stephon Tuitt, Ben Council was a top player, Anthony Rabasa, Brad Carrico, Tony Springman. Your secondary, right? So that's a phenomenal defensive line class, right? Here's who the linebackers were. Okay, now let's go to the secondary. And they got Jalen Brown, Josh Atkinson, Matthias Farley, and Eiler Hardy. It's okay, but it was big drop-off. And the reason I paused – actually, I was wrong. They did get a linebacker, Jarrett Grace. They got one. He was very good. But, like, you have all these D linemen and one linebacker, 4 DBs, and it's just kind of an okay DB class. And Matthias Farley wasn't even recruited to play DB. He only ended up a DB. He played receiver his freshman year. And so that was always the problem with Brian Kelly's recruiting, is there was always these big, giant holes in years where they'd have like really good, like the year that they got, think about this DN class, Dalen Hayes, Khalid Kareem, Julian Aguara, and Adi Takuba Ogundiji and Jameer Jones all in one class. 5 NFL players, 4 of them got drafted. They signed 0 defensive tackles that year. 0. The next year, they got Jerry Tillery at defensive tackle. 0 defensive end. They signed 1, Bo Wallace, and then he got dropped after signing day. And that was always the issue with Brian Kelly's class. There was years they literally did not sign a safety. How do you do that? Like, how does that happen? And you saw way too much of that, Trevor. And that's why these last pick either 23 and 24 or 24 and 25, either one. And it blows away anything Brian Kelly did over a 2-year stretch because there's no holes. There's no holes. You could say, well, the D tackles aren't as good as it needs to be. Fair. But you still signed 4. You know what I mean? You still signed 4. And that's the big difference. Offensively, 23 and 24 is kind of an easy one for me. I mean, think about who they've signed in those periods. And you signed CJ Carr and Kenny Minchie at quarterback. You signed Jeremiah Love and Keedron Young and Aeneas Williams at running back. You signed Jaden Greathouse, Rico Flores, KK Smith, Braylon James, Cam Williams, Micah Gilbert, and Logan Saldate at receiver. You signed Cooper Flanagan and Jack Larson at tight end. That's not as good. Offensive line, you signed Charles Jagasol, Sullivan Absher, Sam Pendleton, Chris Tarrick. I'm trying to think. I always forget. Joe Otting, Gerby Lambert, Anthony Knapp, Peter Jones, and Styles Prescott in the 2-year stretch. That's really good. Now, are there periods you could find better receiver recruiting? Yeah. But in those years, they always fell short somewhere else. And like in 15 and 16, they signed Equanimous St. Brown, Miles Boykin, Chase Claypool, Javon McKinley, Kevin Stepherson, and CJ Sanders in a 2-year period. But then you'd go to other positions and you're like, that offensive line class was garbage. It's like that was a bad running back class or whatever. I mean, there was always holes somewhere else. And that was a big problem for me with Kelly's recruiting. So the best 2-year stretches are going to be pick. Like defense, you can pick either one, but offense, the 25 offensive class, we can be honest and say it's a good class, but it's not an elite class. It's a good class. I gave it, I think, a B+, I think is what my grade was, because you did sign a top 250 quarterback, a top 150 quarterback, a top 150 running back, 2 top 250 receivers, a top 100 tight end, and one of the 3 or 4 best offensive line classes in college football. That's pretty good. It's not elite, though, because you didn't get – like, I like Elijah Burris and I like Scrap Richardson. They shouldn't be your 1 and 2 at receiver in a class at Notre Dame. They should be 2 and 3. That's, 3 and 4, that kind of thing. But I do love Nolan James, and obviously I like Blake Hebert. He's got a lot of talent. Love the offensive line class. Love James Flanagan as a tight end. That's a good class. It's a really good class. There's no holes. The arguments now – and Marcus Freeman's tenure is you got to do better there. Not like, can you please land someone there? You're not going to have that. It's not the same issue. That's where I would go with that one. you have any thoughts on that, Trevor? Or are you good to move
No,
on?
I'm good to move on. I'm in the same boat as you are. Question in here from Mark Avalone. Is it detrimental to wide receiver recruiting that freshman wide receivers rarely see the field, which would say to the elite wide receivers that Notre Dame will make you wait to play?
Well, I think that it's hard to really make that argument when you look at the 2023 season and the top 3 receivers for most of the year, top 2 receivers for most of the year were freshmen. I mean, Jaden Greathouse played a bunch as a freshman. So did Rico Flores. So did Jordan Faison. I mean, you literally had 3 freshman receivers that were your top pass catchers for most of the season. So I don't know that I would accept that premise that that's true at Notre Dame. I think that was disappointingly true this year, but I also don't know that Notre Dame has signed the kind of top receivers in recent years where you could argue that they should have played prior to this year. So I don't know that I would necessarily have that same conversation. You know, they only signed 1 receiver in 2021. Yeah, I thought he should have played more, but Lorenzo Styles is a true freshman, caught 24 passes for 344 yards, and Deion Colsey played that year as well. So, I mean, you've had freshman receivers step in and play at times. I mean, recently, quite a decent amount. I mean, Kevin Stepherson back in 2016, but if you're starting to have to go back to 2016 to prove a point, then the point is made. I think this year it was an issue, but if you go back to 2023, they're number 3, they're number 4, they're number 7 leading pass catchers on that team are all true freshman wide receivers. So I don't know that necessarily works. But here's the thing, Mark, too, is if they were talking about Notre Dame signed a bunch of top 50 guys and they weren't playing as freshmen, then you'd be like, okay, that's a problem. Like if what happened with Cam Williams this year was like a normal occurrence, you're signing a top 50 guy and he doesn't play, then I think eventually that does become a problem. But I think the reason it doesn't hurt Notre Dame a ton is because they're not signing they're not signing a Ryan Williams and he doesn't play. Like what we saw at Texas Tech this year. Like they signed Micah Hudson, who's a big-time player. He didn't play, hardly played. Jonte Cook didn't play a whole lot at Texas. That's different because that's a big-time guy. Notre Dame hasn't had a lot of those guys, which is kind of part of the issue. I think what hurts receiver recruiting is one thing and one thing only, outside of stuff that's existed forever, right? But like they've had plenty of chances. It's, do you want to play in this offense if you were a big-time receiver, like with what you saw in the last few years? And now I think what Mike Denbrock is going to do offensively is going to be very receiver-friendly, and that's why you're seeing a lot of the 26 receivers are all on board with it. But there have been times in the past where, in not recent past, end of Brian Kelly's tenure to now, where there were issues at receiver recruiting because the offense just wasn't great. But even then, it wasn't a big issue, right? So like as far as what I mean is like those type of things, that's the only issue that they've had at recruiting that you could point to there being something structurally wrong with the program that causes that. The real reason that Notre Dame struggled to recruit receivers for a long time is they had a bad position coach. When Mike Denbrock was at Notre Dame and he was the receivers coach, they signed dudes every year. I mean, development was an issue, after he left. But, I mean, Brian Kelly had multiple 1,000-yard receivers his first, 6 years. I mean, you had Michael Floyd had back-to-back 1,000-yard years. You had T.J. Jones had a 1,000-yard season. Will Fuller had 2,000-yard seasons. These issues have come up recently. And it was a lot of because I thought Del Alexander was a poor recruiter and a poor developer of the position. That's ultimately the real reason. Now, there were some structural things that, made it to where I can understand this happening, that happening. But at the end of the day, it's not about playing time because studs know, like Jeremiah Smith knew if he's going to go wherever he's going to play. Ryan Williams knew that. So, that would be – I was too strong when I said there's one reason. I was trying to make a point, right? Like there's only one thing you can point to and say that's why top receivers don't go to Notre Dame. Because of any structural, it's because the offense in recent years hasn't been one that's necessarily attracted top receivers. At the end of the day, if they'd had a better recruiter, they'd have had better success. If they had a better coach, teacher of the position, they'd have had better success. That's ultimately what I think the problem was. And I think that's getting fixed.
Yeah, it's definitely starting to get turned around. That's for sure. Thank goodness for Mike Denbrock being in town.
Yeah, I know, right?
Question from Notre Dame. It just means more. Which quarterback has the best deep ball, the best ball placement, the best pocket awareness, the best 10 to 15 yards throws downfield, and the best quick game?
Best deep ball. That's an interesting one. I would probably go with, that's a good one. I think it's either Kenny or Steve as far as best pure deep ball. CJ didn't throw a ton of deep balls in high school. We've seen him throw them at Notre Dame, but not a ton. He throws a nice deep ball, but I think Steve actually throws a really nice deep ball. At least he has from what we've seen. And Kenny does as well. I'd say probably one of those two would be my pick for that one. I'll kind of say mine, Trev, and if you disagree, you can pipe down. Otherwise, not pipe down, excuse me. Pipe in. Sorry, you can pipe down, buddy, if you disagree. Shut your mouth.
I was like, all right, you got
it. I got caught between chime in and pipe in, and I said pipe down, or sorry about that. But yeah, you can chime in after that. Otherwise, I'll just kind of go to each one. Do you want to make the case for either one of those guys having the best deep ball?
If I were to go on one side and it's just based on me specifically and who I've seen, it would probably be Steve. The ones that I've seen of Kenny have been good, but for Steve, I've seen it in a bowl game, I've seen it in multiple spring games. So my answer would be Steve. Definitely okay with it being Kenny too. So, and again, my answers might change the more I get up and see spring practices, things like that. But as of right now, I'm with you between Kenny or Steve.
Best ball placement, that's easy. That's CJ. Best pocket awareness, that's CJ. Kenny's next. Best 10 to 15 yards downfield, that's CJ. Kenny's close. Kenny throws some nice balls. That's still CJ. Last night, I was, I put stuff on YouTube at night while I'm working. Normally, it's like history stuff or cooking stuff, which I had to stop doing the cooking stuff because I'm in the middle of working and I'm like looking over like, oh, that's interesting. And then I go down a rabbit hole. So I just like put some history show. I was watching something the other night about the Bronze Age collapse, and just it's interesting to listen to. And I can't have silence. I need noise. I'm really weird that way. Like something in the background, like someone talking or a TV show. Like I can't sleep without music on or something on listening. I can't sleep in dead silence. My mind just starts racing and I get wide awake. I'm a very weird dude, which everyone in the chat already knew that. Trevor definitely knew that. But the point is, a game from 2021 from between Lake Orion and Saline was on YouTube, just popped up. It's from CJ's sophomore year. So I pop it on and I'm watching it. I'm watching CJ read right and then come backside to a seam route, and he throws it on the back shoulder in between two guys. He does an RPO 10-yard outcut. Just zoop. I mean, you're just like, all right. I mean, that's his freaking sophomore year. I'm just like, this guy's ridiculous. CJ's really good 10 to 15 yards down the field, and he has been for a long time. Kenny's pretty good there too. And that's Steve's biggest weakness, is that range right there. That 10 to 15 range is his biggest weakness because he's a late reader and he's got a long delivery. Best in the quick game, it's still CJ. Kenny's next. Steve's solid there. I mean, Steve goes to the quick game probably more than anybody else, but being the using it the most doesn't make you the best at it. That's how I would rank him. Trev, what say you? I'm curious also what people in the chat think about these things too. Like I enjoy when you guys respond and give your thoughts on these questions as well.
Yeah, for all these, I'm in the same boat. For best quick game, I think Kenny and CJ are right there. I mean, Kenny has a very quick release. So does CJ. Yeah, I mean, I don't mind. My answers don't sway very far from yours.
Okay. Let's see. Let's go down. I'm trying to mix in because there's a lot of people that put a lot of ones early, and I don't want to just this is an interesting one. Actually, let's go here.
Aiden Benami, who do you believe
Leave the last part out. Just do the first one.
Aiden Benami, who do you believe, Brian Kelly or Greg Brooks Jr.?
I want to be fair here because I don't know the truth on either side. I know what Greg Brooks's family has alleged. I know what Brian Kelly has pushed back with. I know what Greg Brooks's lawyers have then responded to. It's about to get super messy. All I can say is this, without actually knowing what happened, so I'm not accusing anyone of anything, but there's nothing surprising about that situation. If, like, when the Brooks family made their claim, I was like, yeah, that tracks, because that's what he did at Notre Dame. I mean, that was that. I mean, I could name you multiple players, including recently, guys that got injured, and they're like, yeah, I never heard from coach. I just no, it's like I wasn't even part of the team anymore. So that's not at all surprising that it could happen, but I can't say that it did happen that way because I don't know. But it would not shock me if that was true, not because I dislike Brian Kelly. This is what I keep trying to tell people. We only think that because you dislike Brian Kelly. No, I dislike Brian Kelly because I know he's that way. That's why I dislike Brian Kelly. It's because this is kind of how he's always been. And so it would not shock me if that was true, but I don't want to say who I do or don't believe because I don't know the facts of the case. There's a lot we don't know. It's a he said thing. All I can say is it sounds very familiar with stuff that I know happened at Notre Dame. That's all I can say. I can't say that it happened in this case, but I can say that would not shock me because we've seen this before. And I think the truth is probably somewhere in between. I just don't know which side it leans more towards. But and so, well, why would Brian Kelly say that because Brian Kelly's a liar. He always has been. It's like he lies like we breathe. It's not surprise anybody. But I also think you're starting to see more and more of why I despised him so much is becoming clear. It wasn't because of anything he did in football. It's stuff like this. He's not a good person. He doesn't treat people right. And yeah, but as far as who's right, who's wrong, who do I believe? I don't know enough facts to say that. I can only say that doesn't sound outside of the norm for Brian Kelly to say things publicly about how much he loves his players, but doesn't actually do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thoughts on that, Trev?
With a situation that's like this and that's delicate like this, I'm gonna plead the fifth on this one. Outside of the things that you just said, because I agree.
Yeah. I think the fact that there's litigation going on right now where the family's suing LSU also kind of adds to this. Is like, is there posturing happening from both sides because they're in a legal thing? There's just so much that makes this really dirty and really unfortunate. That's why I say so. I can't say I'm Team Brooks because they may not be telling the truth or the whole. I don't have no clue. All I can say is based on what I know of his career at Notre Dame, I'm not surprised that this is being lobbied against him. Is that fair? I mean, is that
That's fair?
Okay. And I did see Brian Kelly's reply. It was it's just, some people, they just talk and you're just like, I believe nothing you're saying. You may be telling me the truth, but your track record is such that I don't believe anything you're saying. And Brian Kelly's one of those guys. It's just, I assume that he's lying to me, and until proven otherwise. That's just the track record that he has.
Jason Smith, do you think more teams will start to go the route of alumni that's had college and NFL success as GMs, like Andrew Luck and Ron Rivera?
I don't know. I mean, I think you've got to be careful with that because you got to look, Trev. I have this crazy belief system, and you're going to think this is nuts, and people in the chat are going to think this is nuts. But I have this belief that you hire the best person for the job. I know that's nuts, but you hire the best person for the job, whether it's an alum or not. If an alum is the second best guy for the job and the best guy for the job wants the job, or the best in a GM role, because I think a GM role doesn't have to be just a man. I think like I kind of like having male coaches because I like having coaches that played the game. But like, if it's a female and she could do a phenomenal job, great. I don't care. Hire the best person for the job, but only hire them because they're the first best person for the job. I don't care male, female, race, ethnicity, where they went to school, are you the best person for the job or not based on what you've done and your vision for this job? And I think if it's an alum, that's an added bonus. I do think it's an added bonus, but I don't think you should hire an alum just because they're an alum. Like, go hire this former. Well, would he do a good job? Because if an alum wouldn't do as good of a job, then you lose the benefit of him being an alum. Having said that, if all things were equal and the same resume, same result, same everything, and it was an alum versus a non-alum, I'm taking the alum. That would be a tiebreaker for me. But if somebody else is better qualified and has a better vision and an alum is second, I'm taking the guy that's got the better vision, the person that's got the better vision for that particular role. So I know that's nuts to say you're actually going to take the best person for the job, and I'm pretty crazy for thinking that, but that's what I would do.
I also think it's a stretch. Well, not a stretch, but I don't think you could compare like Andrew Luck to other alums. That guy's a genius. Right. not saying that other alums.
And he's one of the greatest players. He's not just an alum.
Right.
He might be, behind Elway, your greatest guy that's ever played at your school. Yeah.
So Andrew Luck is call him a unicorn in that aspect. So yeah, I get the question though, Jason.
I'm not against the hiring an alum too. I'm not even saying like, Jason, this is a stupid comment. What I'm saying is you got to find the right hire.
Yeah.
But as I said, and that's why I put it at the very end. However, if all things are equal, I'm taking the alum. Like if, let's say Jerome Bettis wanted the GM job and I met with him and his vision is just kind of okay. And how would you handle this? And I'm like, yeah, I don't know how it's going to work, but man, he's an alum and he would help. No. But if Jerome Bettis came to me, he had a great vision and all this, and I had somebody else who's like considered the best GM in the business, and I'm like, man, they could both do a great job, and they have similar visions. And this, I'm going to go with Jerome in that case, or Lake Dawson, or whatever former alum that people have mentioned for those jobs. But if that guy's not the best guy for the job, then it's like I got to go that direction. Try to get you on staff, and then maybe when that guy leaves, you're ready to take over, but. I think you've got to go with the person that you think could do the job the best. Not who has the best resume, but who could do the best job at your place. And if all things are equal and you can hire an alum, awesome, do it. But it's not a top 5 requirement for me. It could be a deal breaker. That's about it. Marcus Freeman's not an alum. I mean, can you think of any alums that you'd rather have as the head coach at Notre Dame? I don't. Good questions today.
Question in here from Seth Clark. Who are your favorite 2026 cornerback prospects on the board?
Well, Joey O'Brien's my top guy. I have him as a cornerback, even though I think he could play multiple positions, but he's a guy that I really like. He's my top guy on the board. The cornerback board is not super big right now. A lot of the guys they were on that I liked have gone elsewhere. RJ Sermons I liked a lot. He picked USC already. I liked Brandon Lockhart. He's picked USC. Jacob Weatherspoon was a guy I was intrigued by. I wasn't ready to completely jump on board yet. He's committed to Ohio State. Obviously, you have Chaz Smith committed. A couple other guys I like. I really like looking at the board now. I really like Jordan Thomas. He's a kid out of New Jersey. I don't know if you've had a chance to see him yet, but he went to Bergen Catholic. Really good length, athletic kid, smart. Reminds me a lot of Cree Thomas, who I liked a lot. Similar kind of guy, could maybe play boundary, could definitely play field. Good ball hawk. I mean, makes a lot of plays in the football. I really like Jordan Thomas. And, I love recruiting kids out of New Jersey too, Trev. So he's a guy that I have on my board. I really like the Kerry Adams kid from Maryland. 6'2", long, rangy, smart kid, runs well. He's a guy. I need to watch more film of him. I've watched him. I like him. But as far as like where would I rank him, I haven't done that extensive of a dive into him yet. I like Samari Matthews. He's a good player out of North Carolina. He wouldn't be quite as high as some of the other guys on the board for me, but that's kind of where my cornerback board is right now. I need to see Notre Dame maybe expand that a little bit, but I think part of the reason they haven't expanded that is because they are in a really good place with a couple of guys they do like. They already has Chaz Smith. They're gonna have to battle to hold on to him. There's other schools talking to him. Michigan did it in home with him. I think Notre Dame's in a good place right now to keep him, but it's super early, and you're 10 months away from signing day, and a lot can and will happen. But he's a kid that I like as well. Chaz's a good football player. He got a little banged up as a junior, but he's a really good football player as well. So if they can keep him in the class and add a Joey O'Brien, you're going to be super long at that position in this class. But good football players. And like I said, I wouldn't be opposed to them taking 3 corners in this class again because, you could – because Joey does have – I mean, Joey O'Brien, if you were like, dude, we fell short at receiver and we need to move Joey O'Brien to receiver, I'm like, cool. All right, that's fine. But he can also play safety. He could even play some nickel in certain looks. So I love Joey O'Brien. He's one of my favorite players in this class, regardless of position. He's a dude. And if you can just get him and Chaz Smith, I'm like, job well done, in the corner class. And Penn State's is a big time player for Joey O'Brien, but I still think Notre Dame right now is the team to beat, but there's some time. Rock Hill's a good football player, but he's not on the board for Notre Dame anymore. So he's not an option. He's not an option. So I went with guys on the board. He's no longer on the board. Good player, real strong kid, athletic, a little short. I think he's not quite the height that Notre Dame prefers, but look, as we saw with Micah Bell, if Mike Mickens likes a guy and he's short, he'll go after him. But he's not on the board for other reasons.
I am Tenzin. Which position, not necessarily player, will win the Heisman for 25?
I'm curious to kind of see if we're maybe could potentially get into a period here where we might start seeing fewer quarterbacks win it regularly. I think a quarterback should win the Heisman if he's the best player, but that's not what happens. What I don't know is, will any of the big name quarterbacks next year be good enough to win a Heisman? The Arch Mannings and the CJ Carrs and some of the guys that have the big names and reputations, but Julian Sands, but maybe aren't the best quarterbacks. I'm curious about that because a lot of the big names are going to be younger guys. But there are going to be some guys next year that are going to be big name players, going to put up monster numbers that aren't running backs. And so what is that going to be a running back? I mean, not quarterbacks. Is that going to be a running back like Jeremiah Love? Could it be a wide receiver like a Jeremiah Smith or a Ryan Williams? If one of those puts up has a big time sophomore season that puts those kind of numbers, like Jeremiah Smith had a great year, but he didn't have Heisman Trophy numbers this season. He wasn't in that conversation. He finished with 76 catches for 1,300 yards, and you may think that sounds great, but he had 290. 293, he had 300 and over 300 yards in the postseason. He was, I believe, under 1,000 going into the postseason. Those aren't Heisman numbers. Two of his best games he ever had were in the playoffs against Oregon and Tennessee. And they obviously had the big catch against Notre Dame. But let's say he puts up those kind of numbers next year in the regular season, then he could be in that conversation. And he's certainly capable of that, especially with Emeka gone. And he's going to be even more so like the guy because he was number 2 on their team in catches. Emeka led their team in catches with 81. Cardinal obviously is going to have a lot of production, but I could see Jeremiah really taking off next year. I could see Ryan Williams next season putting up some monster numbers in that offense at Alabama. He had 48 for 865 this year. I could see him really breaking out, but will it be enough to win a Heisman? But I could see some receivers competing. I could see some running backs, Trev, next year being in the conversation. Obviously, we Notre Dame fans are very familiar with Jeremiah Love, and but the kids. I could see one of the 2 kids at Penn State maybe having a big time breakout next season. I could see somebody else kind of breaking out and having a big season next year. So I could see something like that happening. But I'd still say right now, I lend more towards quarterback being the position that the Heisman winner will be next year, just because that's the nature of the beast. so to speak. And I mean, even this year we had 2 guys that were finalists, and there should have been no quarterbacks that were finalists this year, for being honest about it, But quarterback is where I'd go. And if it's not a quarterback, I wouldn't be surprised if it's a receiver. That's where I would go.
Yeah, smart money's on quarterback, especially if it's a year where there's not that big name headline guy. There's Jeremiah Smith, but he's getting a new quarterback. There's Ryan Williams. He's getting a new quarterback. And I think in a year where there's already hype around guys like Arch Manning, I think I saw something like Garrett Nussmeier's like 5th in Heisman odds right now or something crazy. I think they're just going to err on the side of picking quarterbacks again, especially because a quarterback didn't win it last year. So,
yeah. Yep.
Hollis Abner, are you still concerned that Arkansas could be a trap game with all that they lost and had to replace in the portal?
I don't know that I have said that Arkansas was a trap game. I don't think we got to that point, but I might have said it the other day. So you talk about still being concerned, but yeah, I'm always concerned about that. I mean, if anything, Hollis, if they do have some losses, it would make them even more of a, okay, that's are you going to overlook that team type of thing? I mean, they were they go 6-6 in the regular season this year and still beat Tennessee at home. I mean, they're going to have talent. I believe Bobby Petrino's still there, correct? Did I miss something about Bobby Petrino not being on the team anymore?
I didn't hear anything about him leaving.
Right? Yeah, so I mean, he's still there, and that's going to be a big thing. And I know Arkansas lost some guys, but Arkansas also has over 20 transfers. I was looking at this the other day. I'm pulling it up now, but they had over 20 transfers on the team. They brought in plenty of guys that can obviously help that football team. So I think that they certainly will be a team that you have to at least keep your eye on next season, because like teams like that, it's not that like, look, if Notre Dame plays their game, they'll beat them and they'll beat them soundly. That's just going to happen. You worry about those teams that they have just enough talent that if you don't, like if you kind of overlook them and those type of things, they could beat you. Absolutely. But I don't think Notre Dame should have any issue with Arkansas next year. I don't care where the game is played. I don't. They should have no issue there. And the quarterback comes back. Kid from Boise, I believe, is still there. They'll have some players. But no, I don't think that should be a game that you're concerned about. But but that's why it kind of, you could make the argument it is a trap game because of where it's placed on the schedule and just looking at it from the standpoint of, they're not going to necessarily be a great team. And that's why you're going on an SEC schedule. You look at kind of what Notre Dame will have coming up next. You just played Purdue. You're getting ready to play Boise next week. You got USC and NC State coming up after that. Could that be a bit of a letdown game? Sure, I guess. Yeah, you should always be worried about going on the road and playing the SEC. But it's a team they should handle, in my opinion.
I think for those reasons.
What would be your trap game next year? Go ahead, Trev. Say what you're going to say, but then afterwards, I'd love to hear who you think the number one trap game, because I haven't quite thought through that yet. We'll talk more as we get closer to the season, but I'm just curious if you have any thoughts early on who that would be.
You mentioned him. Boise State, I think, could be. Look, Notre Dame was one of the very few teams this past season that went undefeated on the road. And I think traveling on the road against the SEC, Marcus Freeman's had a lot of success against the SEC since he's been at the helm. I don't think Arkansas is a trap game. Honestly, as sad as this is to say, I think Notre Dame's trap games have all been at home. 22 Stanford, they got a big win, lost to them.
Yeah.
At home against Marshall in 22, they just battled, had a moral type of victory against Ohio State. Went and lost to Marshall, had a big win on the road against SEC to start the season in 24. They play at home and lose. Not that anybody assumed that Northern Illinois would have been a trap game. But for all of those reasons, that's why I think that I think it could be Boise State. I really do.
Yeah, I'm kind of going through this season, Trevor, and I think Notre Dame is 3-4. Marcus Freeman lost 7 games, 8 games in the regular season his first 3 years, right? So they went 4, 7, and 8. That right? So 8 losses in the regular season, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And then his 9th loss was he won 4 in the first year, 3. Yeah, he's lost 9 games, 8 in the regular season. He's 4-4. 4, lost 4 at home, lost 4 on the road. But to your point, the road games were like Ohio State, Clemson, Louisville, who was ranked and I think undefeated at the time, and USC, who was a better team at that time than what Notre Dame was. To your point, they were all understandable. The way they lost wasn't always great, but like I think 2 of those, USC was favored to win. Ohio State was favored to win. The worst of those games, as far as a team you should have beat, was Clemson. But I don't view it as a trap game. I think Marshall was my big trap game that year because it's right after Ohio State. And then Stanford was a bit of a trap game because they stink and you're at home. And to your point, I think Notre Dame has shown an ability to, when they go on the road, to kind of rally around each other and kind of galvanizes them a little bit. And then you're playing an SEC team like, hey, it's another chance to show the SEC they ain't all that. So those are all reasons why I think you're spot on that's not the team I'd be concerned about. I would look at some of the home games like you mentioned. I would look at NC State. That's right in between Boise and USC. But the one for me that I'm probably most concerned about, Trev, as far as the potential trap games, at Boston College. Because I don't think they're going to be great. You're coming off of a bye. Marcus Freeman's been pretty good on buys, but you look at that stretch run, you're thinking our toughest stretches behind us, and that's when you start getting worried. Like, did you watch I don't know if it was the last episode of Here Come the Irish, but maybe it was but it was the one where they were getting ready to play Indiana. And this was such a cool moment where Benjamin Morrison's in the captain's meeting. You talk about a kid still engaged with his team. Like they're getting ready to play Indiana. Freeman's having his captain's meeting, and Benjamin Morrison brings up like, hey, I'm hearing in the locker room a lot of guys already start talking about Georgia. I think this should be addressed. Like, I freaking love that kid. Like, because he's still invested in Notre Dame. He knows probably he's never going to play Notre Dame again. His career's over. But he's like, look, I still want us to win this game because I'm still the captain. I'm still a leader of this team. And he's like, hey, I'm starting to hear in the locker room a lot of talk about Georgia. And so then Marcus Freeman then makes his his speech in the team meeting next about, we're not overlooking anybody. We got to focus on this game. We're not guaranteed anything beyond that. And you're just like, that's kind of what you get worried about, is you feel like the tough part's behind us or is in front of us down the road. So when you start thinking about the Notre Dame schedule, you start thinking about, like, are you thinking about Navy? Are you thinking about Pitt, Syracuse, maybe teams that might be a little bit better? Or are you thinking like, hey, the tough part's behind us, now we're coasting? And that's when something jumps up and bites you in the ankle, and you got to be careful about that. So those would be probably my trap games. And we'll do more of this as we get closer to the season, but that's a good question, Hollis. Good one.
John A1, which position coach in pure terms of player development can impact the team the most next year between Mike Brown and Al Washington?
I think a D-line coach can always impact the team more than a receivers coach. I feel strongly about that. So just from a pure, this is how I believe football works, I'd say Al Washington. However, I think the growth on the receiver position next year could be huge if Mike Brown really crushes it receiver coaching this offseason. I could see that, because I do think this team is going to throw more. I do believe there's talent on this team. And if Notre Dame, just think about this, Trev. If Notre Dame becomes a team with the talent they're going to have a receiver that's coached at a high level with whoever wins the quarterback job, if all of a sudden Notre Dame becomes a team that's a legitimate passing weapon, like we saw in, 2009, like, could you imagine taking like the 2009 offense? Now, again, it's different scenario and you don't have a Michael Floyd or Golden Tate, but just like the dynamic talent of that. Take the passing game from 2009 and give it the current run game and the current offensive line and the current defense. And think about how good that team would be.
Pretty good.
Yeah. Notre Dame just won a playoff game passing for 90 yards. Ohio State's not winning a playoff game passing for 90 yards. Not happening. But could you imagine if Notre Dame was the kind of team where there's no way they're only going to throw for 90 yards because they're just too good throwing the football? Like, goodness gracious, man. But I think to do that, Mike Brown has to do a great job coaching that group up because they're talented, but they're not Jeremiah Smith. There's no Jeremiah Smith in the room. There's no Devontae Smith in the room. There's no Jamar Chase in the room. With all due respect to Malachi Fields, who I think is an excellent player, I can look and say that guy's a really good college wide receiver and be like, but he's not Michael Floyd. He's not Jamar Chase. He's not. I mean, like, there's variances to be like we talk about the Hall of Fame debate. There's Hall of Famers that are way up here, and there's Hall of Famers who are down here. They're all Hall of Famers, but then there's just the best of the absolute best that deserve their special place in the Hall of Fame. There's a lot of hitters in the Hall of Fame. There's not many that are in the same league as Babe Ruth and Ted Williams and Hank Aaron and Willie Mays and Ken Griffey Jr. There's not a whole lot in that category, Ichiro. You know, I mean, it's like they're all Hall of Famers, but then there's the kind that are like, yeah, but there should be like a special room for those guys. You know, and that's kind of how I look at it is, yeah, it's going to be a really good room, but it's not going to be that.
Yeah.
That's okay, but they got so many options though.
Point being is Notre Dame, as much as I would love for them to see a Jamar Chase in that room, a Devontae Smith in that room, a Justin Jefferson in that room, the list goes on and on. I think the way that the team is constructed, they don't need it. There's a reason they went undefeated in 2018 and their wide receiver room was Miles Boykin and Chase Claypool and Chris Fink. I loved Miles Boykin and Chase Claypool, and I thought they were very good in their own right. None of those guys were better than any of the players that we just mentioned. None of them were Devontae Smith. None of them were Julio Jones. None of them were Jamar Chase. None of them were Jeremiah Smith. And so, yeah, the development with the guys that they have in the room right now and getting them to work together as a cohesive unit is going to be huge. But I'm with you, Brian, with all the questions along the D-line and how are you going to replace the interior? Can the development of the edge players keep going like what we talked about in our defensive episode earlier this week? That's going to be huge. So to answer your question, John, it's Al Washington. But I like that you picked wide receivers and D-line.
Yeah, because I mean, think about it. Like those are the two positions where the play was good to some degree, but it definitely can be better.
Mm-hmm.
And especially if Al Washington can really crush getting those edge players to see improvement next year. Mm-hmm. And you're like, man, it's like a great D-line. Like I would put D-line, O-line, and quarterback as the three positions where if you're elite, it has a greater impact than any other position. Because you could be elite at running back, but not have elite production because your offensive line sucks. You know, I mean, that's just the reality. But if you have a good offensive line and you're elite at quarterback and running back, you're gonna be pretty flipping good. But you know, but here's the thing: if you're elite on the offensive line and just kind of average at running back, you're gonna really be good running the football. The other way around, not so much. If you have a great secondary and a crap front four, you're not going to be a great pass defense. But if have an elite front four and just an average secondary, you're going to be much better defending the pass. Not elite, but much better. So that's why I say those positions, when they're good, impact everything else. And that's why I went with that. Yep.
Super chat from Tyler Evans. Thank you for the super chat, Tyler. Give me one player that you thought was going to be a stud when he got to the NFL and became a bust, and your player vice versa.
Gosh. Yeah, I haven't watched NFL in a long time. Guy that I thought was going to be a stud, but he became a bust. And then somebody, yeah, that's honestly, that's a good question. I don't really know that. Tell off the top of my head, I mean, nothing's popping into my head right now. If you were to ask me college, I probably would be able to maybe think through that a little bit more. But yeah,
I got a couple.
As Broncos fan, I really thought Mike Kroll was going to be a monster coming out of Nebraska, and he was, but he wasn't a bust though. That's the thing. It's like he wasn't a bust. Oh, I got one. Not that I thought he was going to be a stud, but I really thought that, what was the name? Marcus Nash. The Broncos drafted Marcus Nash out of Tennessee back in the day, and I thought he was going to be really, I thought he was going to be pretty good. And he was Peyton Manning's top receiver in '97. I thought he's going to be a really good player, and he was an absolute bust for the Broncos. I think he was a first-round pick. I'm looking it up. Yeah, he was first-round pick of the Broncos in '97 or '98. So he would have been a rookie. He was a rookie the year that they won the Super Bowl. He played 4 years in the NFL, and he caught 4 passes for 7. He played 2 years in the NFL, and he caught 4 passes for 76 yards, and that's it. And he was out of the league. That would be one that I thought he's going to be a pretty good player, and he was a bust. How about you, Trev?
Man, I mean, recently I thought Alex Leatherwood was going to be pretty good. He was a really good offensive lineman at Bama. He went to, I don't even know if he's in the NFL anymore.
I'll look it up.
You got, I mean, gosh, I thought D. Milner was going to be pretty good when he got to the league, the old corner from Bama. He didn't do much. I thought that, honestly, just based on his size and what he did in college, I thought that Laquan Treadwell was going to be decent in the league. Nothing there. And then to answer the second part of your question, Tyler, somebody I thought that was going to be a bust and then ended up being pretty good is DK Metcalf. And I say that for the same reasons as why I thought, I thought I learned my lesson from being high on a guy like Laquan Treadwell. They also came from the same school. And I was like, okay, well, this is just basically a
Decaf was a bad route. That's a good one. I did not think he was going to be that good in the NFL. Bad hips, tight hips, bad route runner. Yeah, he's fast, but you can't just be fast in the NFL. He's been I don't watch the NFL, but I look at numbers, I look at stats, and he's been a pretty good player, it would seem. So much better than I thought he was going to be. That's a good one, Trevor. That's a good one. I like that one.
Thank you. Question in here from Wendell. Thoughts on Dion hiring Falk with no coaching experience?
That's his real name, by the way. So I don't have a problem with that. Like, look, you got to get your start somewhere. And running back is a position where I got to tell you, my first job coaching out of college was at Wittenberg in 2001. And I worked with different positions. I worked with the quarterbacks and the tight ends. But like my first actual coaching job, so 2 years out of college, was running backs. And my first year coaching running backs, I coached an All-American for a team where we set a school record for wins, made our first ever playoff appearance. And I did a pretty good job coaching that because you know why? That's the easiest position to coach. It's not that it's easy like any idiot can do it, but it's an easier position to coach. There's a lot to where you're going to be as good as your talent is. And that's even more true that position, in my opinion, than others. There's things you got to focus on, proper technique, proper timing. Like we were a big under center inside zone team, so like we had to open, cross, get downhill. And if you just opened and got downhill, I mean, you're getting downhill too fast. If you took 2 extra, then you're getting, so it's like, there's things that go into it, but it's not a super, super hard position to play. And you're talking about a guy that played that position and is one of the best to ever do it and was a crafty player, a sound player. Like, look, Marshall Faulk can coach. I mean, even if he doesn't know how to coach, he knows running back. And then it's up to the offensive coaches to kind of help him with, okay, here's how we do practice plans. Here's some different things. But he can just tap into things that work for him as a running back. I'd be shocked if he couldn't coach that position. But I'm taking a chance on a guy like Marshall Faulk. Absolutely. If he wants to coach, I'd absolutely. And I'm a head coach at the Division I level. Like if Marshall Faulk would have called Marcus Freeman and said, "I want to replace Dylan McCullough." All right, let's talk. Let's just sit down and talk. I need to know some idea of what you believe in, but I'd have no reservations doing that because now I'd have a little bit of a tougher time doing that with an offensive lineman. Like if Quentin Nelson called me tomorrow and said, "I want to come coach your line," like, there's a lot more to it than that. Running back is one of those positions. Receiver is one of those positions. To a degree, even secondary is one of those positions where I think you can make a really fast transition into coaching at the highest level, just because of the nature of the craft and the nature of the teaching. Other positions, quarterback, line play, linebacker, I think require a little bit more experience teaching than those other things. That's my stance on that. So I think that was a good hire. I thought that was a smart hire.
Yeah, he did similar to what he did with the D-line when they brought in Warren Sapp.
Yeah.
John A1, if Will Black is one of the best 5 offensive linemen as a freshman, how does your offensive line look in 2025?
If he's one of your 5 best, I think he's left tackle. And so you'd have him left to right. You'd have Black. So for argument's sake, you'd have Black left. You'd have, in my opinion, Black, Schrouth, Craig, Jagasaw, Wagner is what I think the offensive line would look like. If Will Black, as a true freshman, proves he's one of the 5 best, that's what I think it would look like. Because you're starting Charles Jagasaw next year. And then the only question then would be, does Knapp get to push Craig at center like we talked about earlier? That's what I think it would look like. Now, if comes a day where Notre Dame's starting offensive line is something involving Will Black, Charles Jagasaw, and Gerby Lambert, I can live with that. Right? Like, I think Jagasaw is a tackle. I think he could be a really good tackle. But the whole reason we loved him is but if you needed to move him inside to get your 5 best in the field, he could be elite there too. It's just, you better have somebody really good at tackle to move him inside. And Will Black could potentially be that guy. I don't believe that Will Black will be that guy right away, especially since he's not an early enrollee. But just for argument's sake, which is what you're saying, John, let's just say he is. That's what I think it would look like. Yeah. It's a good one.
Agreed. Yeah. Sean Jeter, we've talked a lot about Steve Angeli's processing ability. So in your mind, what would it look like if he improved? Is there an example of someone who has improved in that regard to become elite?
Sure. I mean, I think guys improve in that all the time. It's not that he can't improve at it. It's, can he improve at it to the point where he's a better player than Kenny Minchie or CJ Carr? I mean, that's the stand. Like I've said, like if Rutgers had Steve Angeli, they're at least 1 or 2 wins better with him at quarterback than they are the kid they have now. So I don't think Steve Angeli's like this big doofus that doesn't know how to read a defense, and he's just throwing, curl routes into middle linebackers all the time and doesn't know how to read a defense. It's just there's a level that you need to be elite at a place like Notre Dame, and he hasn't shown me that yet. Could he improve? Certainly, because and Steve's, especially Steve, because as I mentioned yesterday, Trevor, he didn't come to Notre Dame with the same level of experience, having just played the game that CJ and Kenny came with. Because of, like I said, the aspects of, he only started in high school for 2 years because of where he went to high school. And then one of his years was basically cut in half because it was during the COVID stuff. Just sometimes things you just need to play, and eventually that light goes on. Like, usually you don't see linebackers go from having terrible instincts to good instincts. Well, we saw that with Asmar Bilal. Partly because Asmar didn't play football as much as maybe some other guys. So I think that can happen. And I think Steve would be a candidate for that to happen too, because now he's going to get so much more experience in this quarterback battle. But what would it look like if he improved? The ball's getting out. You can see it. Like, so if now he's on a curl route, right? So a guy that really processes well. I'm just giving you a very basic example since we were talking about Riley not hitting this. Curl route, you drop back and throw, and you're here and the ball's coming out as the receiver's getting out of his break. So as the receiver's planning on that outside foot and he's turning around, you're like, here's a passer if the ball's not already gone. Can't throw it too soon because then he turns around and it hits him in the face. But it's the timing is really good, where you're running an out cut and from the slot, and Jaden Greathouse is putting that outside foot in the ground, or that inside foot in the ground for the speed cut. And all of a sudden that ball's coming out. As soon as Jaden gets out, that sucker's coming out. Or you're seeing him see a read and he's just smooth. And all of a sudden, as soon as Malachi Fields breaks inside on that dig cut, Steve's coming back to him and boom, that ball's coming out, hitting Malachi in between the safety and the corner. Like, that tells me his processing is getting better. It's the timing of it. And Steve knows where to go, but he's always late. And that's why he doesn't get the ball out, because he doesn't process well. He doesn't process smooth. It's just, it's like, I could sit down and take a math test and I could be taking a math test with somebody in my class, and I'd get all the right answers, and he'd get all the right answers, but it took me an hour and a half to take the test, and it took him 20 minutes. You know what I mean? We both got all the answers right, and we both knew it, but I had to work through it because it just wasn't as natural to me. I had to he's doing his test. He's got one sheet of, in math tests when you got older, you had to show your work, so you had to submit your things he'd have like one sheet of paper that shows work. And I'm like, I emptied out my whole paper stash was emptied out because I had to go through, you know what I mean? Like, we both got it right, but he was able to it just naturally to him. And like, I know this stuff. Like, I don't need to carry the two, and, I don't need to do all that kind of stuff. I can look at him like, oh, there you go. And that's just kind of how it is. Sometimes a guy knows what to do, but he just can't do it with the same efficiency and timing and promptness that it really takes to be great at it. So I don't know if that analogy makes sense, but I think that one works when you talk about that.
Yeah, if you want an in-game example, think about Riley Leonard's throw, his touchdown pass to Jordan Faison against Army. Threw it right at the top of his break. Ball was already coming out. It was perfect. Hit Faison in stride. And if you want an example of not good processing, it was in the national championship. He missed Chris Mitchell on 2-3 deep curl routes, stop routes, whatever you want to call them, and because it was late, and the one that he did throw was late. So, yeah, in-game example there for you, Sean.
It's good. It's a good question, Sean. Very good question.
Question in here from Ballpeen Shillelagh. What factors do you think will most impact the success of Coach Denbrock's scheme this coming season? New quarterback play, more time in the system, better wide receiver talent, etc.
Okay, first of all, I love the fact that you literally have a Ballpeen Shillelagh as your avatar. That's phenomenal. First of all, let's just get that out of the way. It's one thing to have the name. It's another thing to do that. And so props to you, my friend. But to answer your question, I think the factors that are going to have the biggest impact, it first and foremost starts up front. They have got to be a better pass blocking team. If that doesn't improve, it really doesn't matter if your quarterback is a more natural passer, your receivers are better. You'll look a lot like last year, where when they played inferior teams, Sam Hartman lit people up last year. But when they played somebody good or somebody that had a good D-line, nope, wasn't happening. So it starts with the O-line play. I do think that the time in the system is going to be it's always a factor. The line will know it better. The receivers will know it better. The quarterbacks obviously will know it better. He'll know the players better. So he'll know how better to use Jeremiah Love, how better to use Jaden Greathouse, how better to use Jordan Faison, things along those lines. I think those things factor into the conversation. I think quarterback play is obviously a very important piece to that. Having a quarterback that can execute Denbrock's offense the way that I think ideally he'd like to have it executed. And again, I'll stop saying this because people just need to know this isn't an insult. This isn't a knock on Riley Leonard. It's just different type of players. But, the fact that Steve or Kenny or CJ will now be going into their second spring under this offense, where if Riley Leonard was coming back, he'd be going to his first spring being able to practice within this offense. I think all those things help. But I do think that there was a need for not better receiver talent. I think they were missing a type of receiver that could play at a high level. I think Jaden Greathouse can be a really good football player. He showed that last year. Jordan Faison is a really good football player when he's healthy. I think Chris Mitchell probably should have been used a little bit more effectively and better, and I think there's a lot of reasons why. You've got Cam Williams. You've got guys that can play KK Smith. You've got guys that can play those two field. What they were missing was that dude in the boundary. So when I say better receiver talent, it is, I would go with that, but it's more specific to one position. Bo Collins is a quality football player, right? Like you don't get to the championship game with him being one of your top guys if he stinks, if he's a bum. He's a quality football player. But to really take that next step in the offense, you need a Malachi Fields, a Miles Boykin, a Chase Claypool. I mean, hopefully eventually someday a Michael Floyd, but like even just a Miles, a Chase Claypool, a guy like that is going to make you a lot better. Malachi Fields is more on that level than Bo was. Bo's a good football player. Bo helped Notre Dame was a better team this year because they had Bo than they would have been if they didn't have Bo, in my opinion. But we also saw the drop issues and the separation ability and those type of things kept him from being that next level player. And I think Malachi is that next level player. And that's where I think the receiver talent really needs to take a jump, is that position. And I'm hoping that next year with Malachi and hopefully Micah Gilbert kind of emerging as that number 2, that's good enough to be part of the rotation and play 15, 20 snaps a game, at least either as a rotation with Malachi, but then also as a movement piece. I mean, there's like, if Micah Gilbert has like a breakout season and you're like, he's not ready to be the guy in the boundary and you think he's a boundary. I mean, there's some 12 personnel scenarios where I could see, I want Micah and Malachi on the field together, because I think they can both play other spots to where now I got some big guys on there that I can run block with. I got some big guys on there that I can win one-on-ones with against a more aggressive coverage type of look. I would certainly say that there's some merit to that type of thing, and where you can kind of somewhat use them together. But I hope that that Micah makes a really good jump this year, and Malachi is what we hope he is, because I could see and that's where I think Malachi not being here in the spring stinks for him, but could be a blessing in disguise for like a Micah Gilbert and whoever else they give those reps to in the spring, whether it's maybe a little bit of Cam Williams. Who is that guy going to be? But I think Micah Gilbert could be the biggest beneficiary to where now you say, hey, look, we don't just have one boundary guy. We've got 2 boundary guys that we can think of play. We're trying to play 16 games. Maybe in some of these games, Malachi's only playing 40 snaps and Micah's getting the other 20, 25 because we're trying to keep these guys fresh. Or maybe there's some times we use them together in some certain personnel groupings. There's a lot of different things you can do, but those 2 guys to me stepping up could have the biggest impact at that position. So I think the talent is there. It now, especially with Malachi coming in, but I think that one position is really where I think the quote unquote better receiver talent is needed most, is that position, more than any other receiver positions. Because if you just give me Greathouse and Faison and KK and that's my 3 guys to the field. I'm not even counting Will Pauling. Just looking at the returners. Oh, all right. Cool, let's roll. But what's going on back here, though? I need to figure out what's going on back here. That's the bigger question. And then you take those 3 guys and you then add Will Pauling to that mix as the 4th. You got Logan Saldate maybe competing for some time next year. Don't sleep on Logan. And then you look backside, and now if Micah and maybe Cam and along with Malachi Fields are ready to play that, now you're like, okay, now we're having a big impact. And that would be huge for this offense. Because at the end of the day, I don't care what your scheme is, and if you don't have receivers that can separate against better teams, you're not going to be that you're going to put up a lot of yards in 10 of your 14 games next year. But you're not going to put them in 4 of them. You're not going to do it against A&M and Miami to the same degree. Maybe your first round playoff game, and then when you lose in the second round because you can't you can't protect the quarterback and you can't make plays in the pass game, and you're playing whoever in the second round. I think taking it to that next level will be important, especially Trevor, because you don't have Riley Leonard to bail you out anymore if your receivers aren't playing well. You're going to need them to play well because now your quarterback needs them to do their part more than maybe you needed to this year.
Riley. For me, the biggest thing is continuity for the entire offense. This is the first spring in I can't tell you how long. I think it was when Tommy Rees was here that they've had the same coordinator in back-to-back springs. And I think that's going to be absolutely massive for the offense as a whole. Wide receivers included, quarterbacks, offensive line, running backs, the entire operation. That is absolutely massive. So for me, that's my biggest takeaway. Salty Virginia Peanuts. How did
Misters basically is what he's saying.
Okay.
It's Riley not Leonard, but that's basically what he's trying to say, yeah.
Gotcha. Yep. How did Riley Leonard, R.J. Oben, and Jack Kaiser acquit themselves at the Senior Bowl, and who had the best performance?
Well, I didn't watch, but from what I read, it sounds like Jack Kaiser had the best week. I did read some good things about Riley Leonard. I know he'd had a decent performance in the game. I heard some. I mean, anytime there's so many people that cover that sport, that event now. Like you'll read. I read one thing I literally read this in the span of 20 minutes. I saw a tweet of a draft guy saying that Jackson Dart had the best week. I saw a tweet of somebody saying that Riley Leonard helped himself the most, and I saw a tweet that said Jalen Milroe helped himself the most. And then I saw another tweet like an hour later that said Jalen Milroe was terrible at the Senior Bowl. And I saw more of that. But then there was this one guy that thought Jalen Milroe did a great job. And there was another quarterback there that I read did really well. But you're always going to get variance of opinions. You know, like it's hilarious. Like there's all these people like On Three and Rivals all talking about Chris Burgess looked great at the Army game, and then you've got the knuckleheads at 247 like, yeah, he was all right. He wasn't, you're always going to get a little bit of that. But it sounds like for the most part, from what I read, is Riley did, he did well. He had a solid performance. RJ Oben, I saw a couple things where they said he had actually a nice week as well, but I didn't see any clips I saw one clip of him winning on the edge. I think it was in the game. Was it the game? Yeah, he had a pressure on the play where Jack Kaiser had to pick. It was RJ that had the pressure on the play where Jack Kaiser had to pick. I saw that highlight after the game. And so, yeah. And then Jack won the MVP or best player award. And the cool thing about that is that's voted on by the players that they win against all week. So like the O lineman pick who the top D lineman was. The D lineman pick who the top offensive lineman was. So I think is really cool. And Jack won the most outstanding linebacker for whatever team he was on. So it sounds like Jack had the best week. And, of course, you heard great interview, great character, first guy out on the field every day. Like, I think I retweeted and was like, I'd be shocked if we didn't hear this. Yeah. Like, you just kind of expect to hear, like, oh, Jack Kaiser's a great kid who was respectful and hardworking and, like, well, duh. Do you not know Jack Kaiser? Like, you're saying this if you're surprised by it. Like, this is who Jack Kaiser is, man. Like, that's pretty awesome. But it also sounds like, and this is what I think a lot of people that didn't really watch Notre Dame a ton this year or didn't study him are surprised by. I read a lot of stuff about his performance, like surprisingly athletic. I didn't realize he was that fast. I mean, I read some of that stuff too. Like, I don't think people realize how athletic Jack Kaiser is. And that's where I think some people were a little surprised by how well he performed. It was like, oh, this guy's actually a pretty darn good athlete. Like, yep.
It's a microcosm of Notre Dame season.
Yep.
Nobody knows it. And then they play Notre Dame. It's like, wow, they're actually really long and really fast and really athletic.
I know a couple guys that have connections around the Ohio State program. And that's something that I heard a lot coming out of that game is that the Ohio State players thought that Notre Dame sucked. Like, they were going to kill this team. And even when they jumped on them early, there was these guys are hitting. And these guys are physical, and coming out of the game, there was a lot of, from people that I know that have connections there, like Ohio State has a much different opinion of Notre Dame now than they did going into that game. And you're like, how could they think that? They just played them a year ago. They're like, this is a much different team than the one we played last year, which is interesting because they played them tougher last year than they did this year. But Ohio State wasn't that good last year either. And these are both much better teams. So I thought that was pretty interesting that I got some of that feedback. Yep.
Salty Virginia Peanuts. What were the 3 most exciting plays of the Irish playoffs run?
Oh, man. I can only pick 3. If I can only pick 3, oh, my gosh. Okay, can I go 3 before the playoffs? Because, honestly, the 3 biggest plays of the playoffs are the season – in my opinion, all happened in the playoffs. It was Jeremiah Love's 98-yard touchdown run. It was RJ Oben's strip sack. And it was Jaden Harrison's kick return. Like, I went nuts on that one. And Vince and I went nuts on the Jeremiah Love one because we were outside when that run happened. We were Vince almost threw me off the balcony. He shoved me so hard. He was so excited. I almost went over to the balcony. I was, hey, man, what's going on here? He was so excited. But then you start linking the regular season and you start thinking about different things that happen in the regular season, like Leonard Moore's forced fumble. You think of the touchdown pass to Jaden Greathouse in that game. You think of the back shoulder throw to Bo Collins against A&M and how that sparked them. Oh, man. I mean, there's so many good ones. You think of, the pick sixes against USC, especially the one by Christian Gray. You think of Jeremiah Love hurdling the Army player for the touchdown, and then, oh, by the way, going for like a 76-yard touchdown run against Army as well. Like, there's so many exciting plays from the season. It's hard to pick just three. But I got to go with the I mean, and then even in the postseason, it's like the pass to Aeneas Williams against Penn State, where it's like, I think that was the big momentum changer of that game. When Riley hit him on the sluggo, when they went on the drive where they tied it up, the Christian Gray pick, because you're like, all right, here comes overtime. And then he picks that pass off. You're like, oh my gosh. So, but I'd still go, my top three probably, Trev, would be the Love run against Indiana, the RJ Oben strip sack, and the Jaden Harrison kick return. What say you?
I am on board with you, except I'm replacing the RJ Oben strip sack with the play that Jaden Greathouse scored in the Penn State game.
Oh, yeah, the guy fell down.
Yeah, the guy got tased.
The guy that tased after that rec league head move that Jaden Greathouse did.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, no, the rec league head move came after he caught it, remember?
After he caught it? Oh, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Because per the rec league rules, you have to have the ball in your hands to make the head fake. So thank God that guy had a taser. But those are probably my three. If I had to be honest, that's probably my three. Because I won't lie. As much as I tried to put on a stoic face in the post game, I thought that game was over. After the interception and the Nicholas Singleton touchdown run, and it was 24-17, I was like, yeah, it was a great season. I think the Magic's just a little bit out, and Jaden Greathouse single-handedly went to work.
Yeah.
So
yeah. I think it might have been his grandpa up in the stands with the taser. I think that's what happened. Oh my goodness.
Salty Virginia Peanuts, what is the biggest benefit Notre Dame will realize from the ACC ESPN deal?
I think that a little bit of a better schedule, because there's talk that part of this deal is going to include Notre Dame maybe altering its, because like for right now, the Notre Dame's ACC schedule is set through 2036. I could see them. I think I've heard some rumblings that they're going to change that, and that they're not going to have that. They're going to say, look, the deal's still the deal, but we're going to adjust Notre Dame's schedule a little bit with their involvement and blessing. I think that could be a benefit to Notre Dame. So you're playing two of Clemson, Miami, and Florida State every year. I think that helps Notre Dame's schedule moving forward. I think that's a benefit. But the other part of that benefit, just in general, is you've got 5 games a year that you have for the next 11, 12 seasons, which is important in this era of ever-shifting dynamics. So you're always going to have at least those 5, plus you're always going to have Navy. So you're half your schedule set, and hopefully you can keep sign USC to a long-term deal as well, to where 7 of your games are kind of set every year, and it makes it a little bit easier for them to put a schedule together. So I think just that continuity of knowing you've got that ACC deal to rely on. But those are the biggest things. And I mean, of course, you're still getting money from the deal. You're still going to get, 8 figures from the deal, that type of thing. But I think the stability of the scheduling, and then if they're able to tinker it to where maybe there's better chances you're going to have good ACC competition every year, because it does Notre Dame no good to play 5 ACC bums. Like it doesn't. Like this year did not work out great with the ACC schedule. I mean, you had the big Louisville win, which was good, but after that, you had Stanford, who stinks. You had, I'm even trying to think of who the ACC teams were on the schedule this year. Florida State stunk. You had, I'm literally, you had Louisville. Right, I can't believe I'm drawing a complete blank on who they played in the ACC this year. Louisville, Stanford, Georgia Tech was, okay. Florida State was bad. Virginia was bad.
Yeah.
I mean, that doesn't do you any good. Louisville should be the second best ACC team you play most years. That's just, except that year where they play like Texas and Bama. Okay, then I want give me, Pitt, give me Stanford, give me Duke, give me UVA. Give me some of those teams, and I'll be okay because we got Bama and Texas on the schedule and USC on the schedule.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, that's what I think. All right, good questions. Let me find somebody we haven't gotten to yet. Here's a topic we haven't discussed.
Joseph Barrett, did you happen to watch Notre Dame's women's basketball last night? What has happened to Stanford's women's basketball actually was sad. A once proud program reduced to the bottom of the ACC.
Are they in the bottom of the ACC? I didn't think they were in the bottom of the ACC. I know they're not having a very good year, but
I'm not sure.
But listen, that kind of tends to happen when one of the greatest coaches to ever coach your sport leaves. I mean, what happened the year after? Like, what happened? Like, Notre Dame went through that period when Muffet retired. I mean, her last year was bad, and then Niall Ivy's first year wasn't exactly tremendous because, like, when you lose a legend, and Tara Vanderveer, I think, retired after last season, correct? And didn't she retire? And I just think it's just a down year for a team that's in a new league. Yeah, they're fourth to last. I mean, they're close in the bottom. They're having a rough year. They're 11-11. I just think it's that. And then they lost. What was her name? Cameron Brinks, wasn't that her name? She was like an All-American last year. She left. So I just think the transition to the ACC was a rough one. Did Pac-12 falling apart? All the uncertainty of the league is going to your legendary head coach leaves. It's going to make it harder for you to get portal pickups and get those type of things. So I think it's bad luck. I don't know that I would necessarily say that this means that Stanford is forever done. I just think it's part of. I mean, they were 30-6 last year, and then lost. Wasn't she the second or third overall pick of the NBA draft?
I think so. Cameron Brink.
And yeah. So I just think this is one of those years. Notre Dame went through that. Look what happened to Notre Dame the year after they lost the title game to Baylor. I mean, when they lost Enrique, went in the draft. Mabry went in the draft. Jackie left early. Jess Shepard was done. Brianna was done. Like all in the same offseason, and they went. They didn't make the NCAA tournament the next year. They were sub 500, and that was with Muffet. So not only did they lose Brink and they lost all the other their top players, but then they also lost Tara Vanderveer, who's one of the greatest women's coaches to ever do it. And I think it's just kind of all hit at the same time. And I just think this is what happens. And Notre Dame went through that recently. UConn will go through that when Gino retires. I'm pretty sure the first year after Gino, they're going to. And but I did watch the game last night, and I also think part of that was Notre Dame's really freaking good.
I was just about to say, I think the other factor of that performance is they played a really good basketball team.
Yeah. Now 50-15 at halftime is a little bit like, okay, you're struggling.
Going on a 33-7 run the entire second quarter is bananas.
Yeah, it is. That's a fun team to watch. Like they had, like Maddie had a play where she drove left, pulls up as she's fading towards the baseline and just drains a little runner. And I'm like, this team is so freaking good. This team is fun to watch, man. They are really fun to watch. Oh, goodness gracious. And Cass Prosper's like really coming into her role really well off the bench. That's a fun team to watch, dude.
And that
really fun team to watch.
The best backcourt in women's basketball right now.
And it's not even close.
Not even close. Ugh. Jason Rose. Hey, guys, not asking you to change your stance on the hire of Chris Ash, but what are some things that you think we will see from his defense, and what are some things that he's done that you like?
He has – what's some things he's done that I like? At most of the places he's coached, I believe their run defense has gotten better. That's a positive. I think that's one area where Notre Dame can be better. I've read some interviews that that have talked about how his defense is built on he doesn't make things unnecessarily complicated, that players can absorb it well and play fast. I think that matters. So that's a positive. I mean, those are two pretty quality positives. I mean, they haven't been great at forcing turnovers. They've, like, other than Texas, the thing is he's never had any bad well, that's not true. He's never had a bad defense, anything but a top 25 defense when he's coached at a place in a circumstance like he's going to be stepping into at Notre Dame. Like when he took over at Arkansas, they got worse the next year, but he took over a defense that was god awful. And they had to kind of start over from scratch. And the Texas defense was really bad the year before he got there. And it was the COVID year, so he didn't have the offseason to instill his defense and get to know players. It's like, how do you instill an offense or defense when you literally have no offseason where you can be with your team? Like, so that's why I say some of these things I just kind of, like, I don't care that he was a bad head coach. Don't care. It has nothing to do with being a defensive coordinator, right? The Texas thing is like, that's concerning, but I don't crush him for it because it's like, you kind of understand. It's like Mike Mickens' first year recruiting at Notre Dame was not great, right? I thought there was a couple guys I liked, but it turned out to be not great. And you're like, well, what changed? Well, he was allowed to go on the road and evaluate. Like, that's what changed. He was able to host kids for visits. I mean, because they couldn't go on the road and recruit, and they couldn't bring kids on campus. You had to literally do your entire recruiting. I mean, we even went and did in-home visit, or we did in-school visits and brought kids to visit at the Division III and 1AA level. It's like, you'd only ever phone recruit a kid who's like, okay, we have 80 kids committed and we need 85 to get the numbers the school wants. So let's freaking go find 5 kids. You know what I mean? Like, right. But even there, we'd have school visits, and we'd like, when I was a recruiting coordinator at Defiance, we'd have kids go in the locker room. We'd have their jersey numbers of like what they were, and we'd have all this kind of cool stuff set up and do all that type of stuff. And we get like their nameplates. We'd print off their nameplates and put it above. I mean, I did it right, man. But Notre Dame couldn't do that. Mike Mickens' first year, so you kind of just, some of you guys say, okay, it's not good, but it doesn't really fit in line with the other stuff. And so he's never been at a school that was stable and had a bad defense. They've always been good. My question is it going to be good enough? That's the question. But so those are some things that he's done that I like. Improvement in the run game. It's good reports about it being learnable. That type of stuff is where I would be.
Yeah, I'll say this, and there's two trains of thought here, and I'm talking about this strictly from a Notre Dame lens. There's just some coaches out there that they have their strengths, like every coach does, and some of it is being able to maintain, and some of it is like excelling at certain things. Like, I'll use the Bengals as an example. Zach Taylor, their head coach, is always a hot topic of discussion, but he's an offensive-minded guy. And there's one train of thought of, well, I mean, it doesn't take that much work to do good with Joe Burrow and T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, and true. But also
Joe Mixon at one point in time as well, too, right? Yeah.
Right. But also, with that being said, the Bengals weren't 9-8 this season because of their offense. You know what I mean? So I view Chris Ash very much the same. I think that in college, there's some coaches that you hire because they're really great at building and they're great at turning around sides of the ball or sides of the program. I don't think Chris Ash is that. But I do think what he is he's good at maintaining what he has. And he's walking into a winning situation at Notre Dame, loaded with talent, loaded with experience now after this young season. And so there's nothing in his track record that has shown that he's going to come in and just absolutely fumble the bag. So, and I am saying that as a legitimate positive, because there are some coaches that have walked into winning situations and just completely lose it. So there is nothing that he has shown that's happened. It's just, if Notre Dame was asking him to come in and rebuild the defense, I would not. I would be a lot more vocal of my opinion of this hire, but he's not being asked to do that in South Bend, at least not this year. So we're gonna see what that looks like moving forward. But for the 2025 season, it would take a massacre of a job for it to not still be a good defense. But to Brian's point, is it going to be championship caliber? We'll find out. Jason Smith, what are the areas that Xavier Watts was weak at, or explain to me why he isn't a first-round projection? If he had come in as a high recruit, would his production in college get him round one projections?
I think it'd get him round one projections from people that cover the NFL like for a job. I don't know that it would change what NFL scouts think of him, the people whose job it depends on really getting these things right. Because if you make a mock draft and you get it wrong, it's like, well, I can't control what other people do, or if you have a guy that you think is going to be good, well, he went to the wrong system. You always can explain away why you got it wrong. When you're a scout or a GM or a coach and you lose, it's like there's no excuses. You lost because you're defined entirely by the success of your football team. And so I don't know that it would change that. We see tons of highly ranked guys, all-American guys, fall in the draft because there's things that don't project well. So I don't know that Xavier's not weak at anything. What you would look at and say, why do I think he's not getting first-round projection? I think number one is just level of athleticism. He's not an elite athlete. He's not in Caleb Downs' category from an explosiveness standpoint or a power standpoint. So I think that's a big factor in it. Xavier is a more than willing tackler. How well does that translate to the next level? It's a fair question. He's better in coverage off the ball than he is actually in man coverage. I think that's something they look at. But at the end of the day, if Xavier Watts goes to the combine and runs a 4.42, he's going to skyrocket up boards. Even with some of those other things. I think that's same reason Julian Love fell in the draft. He's not real big, and he's not real fast. Great football player. Well, Julian Love's turned out to be, apparently, I'm told by some of my friends who follow that he's turned out to be a pretty good NFL football player. I think he's with the Seahawks now, right? Or he was with the Giants.
Yeah, he's with the Seahawks now. He's a safety.
Yeah, but he got drafted lower because of why? He's not real big and he was kind of slow. I mean, a 4.55, 4.58 is slow for a defensive back. And that's why he fell to fourth round. But as he got to the NFL, you realize he's really smart. He's still a pretty good athlete. He's just not fast. And what? He was a Pro Bowl. I'm looking at his stats. He was a Pro Bowler last year. He's been over 100 tackles 3 years in a row. So it looks like he's been a pretty good football player in the NFL. So 7 INTs the last 2 years. Where did they have passes? They had 12 pass breakups this year, more than he had last year. So more total passes defense this year than last year. So he might not get drafted high, but I think Xavier Watts is still going to be a good NFL football player. Some smart team that cares more about you being a great football player than they do about what you ran at the 40-yard dash is going to draft him like in the late second round, early third, and you're going to be like, why does that team always get that? Why does that team, you know what I mean? Like the Chiefs are going to draft him at the end of the second round and be like, here we go again. That's what something like that's going to happen. Some team that's always good, the Bills or somebody that's always good, the Niners, some smart team is going to be like, yeah, I know he didn't run the 40 time you want, but I watched this guy play against the best of the best, and he's a really good freaking football player. And part of it's, too, going to be scheme fit. If you're looking for the guy at his position to be a pure man cover guy, then he's not your guy. But if you're a zone team and you need someone who's a good athlete and a high football IQ guy that's around the ball a ton, that's your cup of tea right there. So fit's going to be part of it, too. But I just think it really comes down to just that elite top-level athleticism. He doesn't have the elite size or the elite athleticism that what the perceived top guys of the position have. That's what I think. Because production doesn't really matter at the next. I mean, just because you were a great producer in college doesn't mean you're going to be a great producer at the next level. Not that it's irrelevant, but it just doesn't. If you're a 4.6 at corner, they don't care how many interceptions you had last year because it doesn't translate unless you're 6'3.5 like Richard Sherman was.
Whoever gets him, it's going to be a steal. I'll say that. But he's going to get picked up by an organization like the Lions. Like Dan Campbell has vocally came out and said things like, I don't care about the combine. I care about what you did on a football field. And that would be fun. I don't think he goes to the Lions. I'm not in tune at all with any mock drafts. Like I I don't want to
We're
say
just
that I
sharing
don't.
our opinions.
Yeah. I don't want to say that I don't care about mock drafts, but like half of them, it's just like, okay. But that'd be cool to watch him in a defensive backfield, him and Brian Branch. That'd be nuts. That'd be a lot of fun. Jacob Hayden told me to come back and ask after the season, what improvements can each individual coach make to take their game to the next level? And what have they done that has impressed you the most so far?
So I'm gonna I'm gonna say quarterback coach. I need to see Gino Guidugli do a better job of making sure his quarterbacks throw with better timing. That's been an issue now really for 3 years in a row. Well, 2 years in a row, excuse me, because he wasn't here 3 years ago. But even Sam Hartman and Riley Leonard, who are true veterans, were not always great with timing. They were often late kind of getting the ball out. I think there's some sort of disconnect there where that's lacking. So I think that's going to be the biggest thing for me at that position. What has he done that's impressed so far? I mean, look, you can't deny that we haven't seen Steve Angeli and Riley Leonard and some of his quarterbacks the last couple of years show a lot of poise. I don't think they're now part of that's them, but then there's also a teaching element involved in that as well that you can't discount. So I think that, and you can't discount that Steve Angeli hasn't improved the last 2 years. I mean, there's technical things that Steve has done better. And give him their running back. There's no running backs coach, so it's hard to do that one. Wide receivers, Mike Brown, just getting his unit to play with greater urgency. It's a big one for me. What impressed me the most, I thought in the playoff, the players competed for the ball a lot better than they did in the regular season. And that was a major issue in previous years. And then it's not just Jaden Greathouse. I thought Chris Mitchell did that. I thought Jordan Faison did that. I thought Bo, I mean, that catch for the touchdown against Georgia was not an easy catch. It wasn't a hard catch, but it wasn't an easy one. You were contested. I thought they did a much better job there. And they blocked their tails off at receiver. That's partly them, but that's also partly coaching. So overall, I just want to see a much greater sense of urgency from the wide receiver position of just how they go out there. Come off the line faster. Get into your top end faster. Get out of your top end faster. You know, just some of those type of things. And I think that's going to be a big thing. Tight end, more consistency in the run game. Like, that's the only thing I care more about. Offensive line, way better in pass pro. And then just overall line games were a problem for them this year. Picking up and handling line games. Actually, let me rephrase that. Picking up line games has now been an issue for 2 years in a row. And especially in the pass game, that's got to get fixed. What has he done so far that's impressed me? This year, they played with a lot more physicality. And the first couple playoff games made me think maybe they just out-talented people because they did not come off the line aggressively in the first two playoff games. But they did a much better job of that in the third and fourth playoff games. And so it just kind of tells me, I think they're a little banged up. I think they were a little kind of overwhelmed by kind of some of the stuff that was being thrown at them those first two games. He got them on the right path. But I used to hammer Rudolph last year for his lines just did not come off the line with any authority whatsoever. They were catchers. They were leverage guys. They did not come off with any kind of power. And they would not move their feet through contact. They did a much better job of that stuff this year. D-line, way better pass rushing moves, like individual pass rushing moves. Much, much greater need. What has he impressed me so far? Look, Joe Rudolph gets a lot of defenders jump in and be like, look at all the injuries he's had. And I don't hear those same people saying that about Al Washington. Al Washington did a much better job of dealing with injuries than what Joe Rudolph did. And that's not to say Joe Rudolph didn't do a very good job. It's just what Al did was even – I said that in a way that sounded very negative towards Joe Rudolph. That's not how I meant that to be. It's meant to be more – if you think Rudolph did a good job with injuries, Al's job was even better. And when you consider all he lost at the position and they kept them rolling, I give him a lot of credit for that. That takes a level of buy-in from what your kids are doing. My big thing with Coach Washington is I think his players are very sound. They're very sound. They do a nice job of knowing what to do. They're not out of position a ton. Now I need you to give them the tools to dominate. That's the big thing. Improve the block destruction tools, but more importantly, especially your edge players, You need to do a better job of teaching them how to win consistently with a pass rush. It's huge for me. Huge. Linebacker, as a unit, they need to do a lot better job of finding like the intermediate pass routes when they're in zone coverage. That's the big thing for me. They can all do a better job there. There was some inconsistency with run fits at times. Never happened with Jack Kaiser. Was always with the younger guys. That's part of youth. It actually was less of a problem this year than I thought it was going to be, which tells me that Max Bulla did a darn good job getting those guys ready to play. What has he done that's impressed me? I mean, there's a lot. His guys are really good. And finding ways to get the right rotation in there was a good job as well. Keeping everybody in the flow of the game. Secondary, what can Mike Mickens do a better job of? Developing an in-house nickel. That would be my if I had to find some sort of issue, I guess that would be it. It's kind of hard to find one otherwise. What has he done that's impressed me? It's just everything. He's an elite coach. I mean, they're a fundamentally sound unit. Oh, here's the thing. Not that he teaches this, but your corners got real grabby at times this year. Especially Benjamin was that way, and then also Christian was that way. Unnecessarily grabby. That's something I think they can improve upon as well. And he'll need to do that, in my view. Anything to add to that, Trev?
No, I mean, for the quarterbacks, I think they do a really good job of taking care of the football in both senses. They don't really fumble a whole lot. They take care of the ball when they're in the pocket. They make the right decision. Now, where I want to see the evolution of the room is you have to start walking that fine line between not turning it over and taking calculated risks, because that is what's kind of been missing from Notre Dame's passing offense.
Still being aggressive?
Yes.
Yeah, agree.
Yeah, because it's, sure, you might end every season with under 7 interceptions, but if you also end the season with barely 20 touchdown passes, what's kind of the risk reward? I'm not saying in order to get to 40, start throwing 17 interceptions in a year. You just got to find the in between. But that's outside of that, that's the only other one that I would add. I think all the other ones are spot on. Super chat from Ryan Elliott. Thank you, Ryan. Coming in late. Anybody else annoyed at Chad Bowden for saying it just means more at USC? I don't know if those were his exact words, but it was along those lines. They can't even put butts in the seats at USC these days.
Ryan, I don't mean this in any disrespectful manner, but I'm getting the impression that you are responding to what people said he said and not actually responding to you watching the video. Perhaps I'm wrong, or maybe you watched the video after reading what people told you he said, and then you just kind of looked at it within that lines. He did not say it means more at USC. He said it meant more to him being at USC. Completely different than how it's being taken by a lot of Notre Dame fans. So I'm not at all annoyed by what he said. Am I annoyed he left? Yeah, I'm annoyed he left. I think he was really good at the job he did. I thought they were kind of really rolling, and it is what it is. But if you listen to what he said it means more to him. It'd be like us. Again, imagine that, Ryan, you and I are assistant coaches at Ohio State, right? And we're doing great things, and I'm the recruiting coordinator, and you're my right-hand man, and Marcus Freeman calls and says, "Hey, Driscoll, I want you and Elliott to come over here to Notre Dame and run my recruiting operation." We would say, like, this means the world to us. I mean, it means so much to me to be here. It means more to me to be here than anywhere else, because I grew up a Notre Dame fan, and I remember rocking it, right? And Buckeye fans would be spinning it, and this guy sucks, and then because they'd be mad that we left their team. But our responsibility. But that's not what I said. I grew up a Notre Dame fan. I grew up in Northwest Ohio as a big Notre Dame fan. This is the team I always dreamed of coaching for. And so, yeah, it means more to me. Doesn't mean I didn't love my time there. Doesn't mean I don't love, I can't even say that in a hypothetical of loving the guy that I worked for. But, so maybe Ohio State was the best example. Clemson, we're at Clemson. I loved working for Dabo. Just an awesome guy. But you know what? This was my dream. It means more to me to be able to do it here than it does anywhere else. It means more to me to bring a championship to the team I grew up rooting for than it does anywhere else. That's basically what he was saying. Now, again, you don't have to like that he left, and you can be pissed off. You can hate the guy for, but don't put on something. There's very few things that annoy me more. And Ryan, I don't think you're doing this because I think what you said was you're responding to what other people said that he said. So I'm giving you a pass here. But like what bothers me is, for me personally, when people will criticize me for things that I never said. I had a Notre Dame coach call me one time. This is a true story. And he starts going off on me about something. I said, hold on a second. I said, first of all, stop yelling at me. I'm a grown-up, number one. I said, number two, you're yelling at me and accusing me of saying something that I did not say. Look, there's a reason I let anybody in the program know my number. Because if I'm saying something that's not right or not there, contact me. And there was one time I told this story. Mike Elko called me. He's like, hey, listen, I read what you said about this play. Just so you know, we were actually in this coverage, and this guy was the one that was supposed to make that play. So what you wrote was not correct. So all right, cool, coach, thanks, appreciate that. And I went and corrected it. And there's been times that I've said things that coaches have called me and cleared air, say, just so you know, like, I know you're getting this point of view, but that's not what happened. Here's our point of view. And sometimes they'll do it contentiously, and I'll take it if what they're saying is something I said. If I said something that was out of line, I will own that. But I'm not going to sit here and allow you to bitch at me for something I never said, because I didn't say that. I never said you couldn't do this or you weren't doing this. This is what I said. You're being told this. So what happened when this coach called me is somebody had listened to our podcast and took a snippet of what I said and sent it to him. But what I said was, it's not like he's doing this, this, and this, and this. They took that first part out and they just put me saying he's doing this, 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 and this. And he was pissed that I said he was doing those things. I said, Coach, whoever sent you that is trying to start problems, because that's not what I said. And I said, did that person send you the video that we did a week ago where I defended you about this, or the week? And I said, he's like, no, they didn't send me that. I said, exactly. Because they're trying to start crap with you. They're not actually trying to inform you of what I really said. I now have a great relationship with that guy. But he'll still call me on stuff that he thinks I'm wrong about. And that's okay. But I won't answer for things that I never said. And I won't allow you to disparage me with things that I never said. If I say something like, I think Notre Dame's going to lose 4 games next year, and they go out and go 12-0, you can crush me all you want, because I got it wrong. That's cool. I said it. I said 8-4. They went 12-0. That's cool. I own that. But what I don't like, and this happens way more than you'd think, is when people that run other podcasts or other websites or fans that just don't like me for whatever reason sit there and say, well, Driscoll said this. No, I didn't. I didn't say that at all. So that's kind of where I feel about that. And that's why I'm a little sensitive to people going at Chad on this topic. It's not because Chad is a friend of mine. I consider him a friend. I like Chad. We get along very well. We would see each other at the club we both belong to all the time. But he also understood, and he and I had conversations like, look, I'm not going to go defend you just because we're friends. Like, if you do something wrong, then I'm going to have to call you on it. That's my job. I owe that to the people that pay money to be on the site. I'm not going to defend him, especially now that he's gone. Why would I defend him now that he's gone? So you can feel however you want to feel, but criticize him for what he actually did or what he actually said. Don't hate on him because you literally cut off his comment halfway through. It wasn't even a fault, because I sent you the comment, Trevor. It wasn't even the next sentence. It was literally they cut him off in mid-sentence to prove a point, to just create strife, because some people just thrive on drama. It's like, dude, did you ever emotionally leave middle school, or are you kind of still stuck there? And that's my issue. It's that right there. Be honest about what people said. And because if you have to spin it or cut what he said off halfway through, then you're the person who's got the problem, not him. If what he said in the entire context is not going to give you the same reaction, so you have to cut a comment off, then you're trying to just start stuff. You're not responding to what he said. So there were things Chad said that I wish he would not have said, but he was being honest. And I don't think he said anything that disparaged Notre Dame. I think he works at USC now, and he was letting people know of a certain way. So that's my issue with it, Ryan, is that I don't think what people are upset about is what he actually said. Doesn't mean you have to like it, but it's just not what he said. And that's my thing, is just, if you want to be upset about what he said in the proper context, go for it. If you want to say, listen, he shouldn't say it means more, he should have said it differently. Fair. Very fair. But that's not what he was saying. He was saying it means more to him to be at the school he grew up rooting for. That's what he was saying. Trev, I made you listen to the whole thing. Am I missing the context of that inappropriately, or do you feel like I have that correct? I'm reading that correct, because you didn't talk to him like I did. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, look, man, with the situation like this, I don't think there's reading it right or wrong. I think it's just listening to the whole thing. If I'm being real, I said it earlier. I think people are just mad he went to USC, which is fine, but don't let that sway your opinion of what's fact and what isn't. That's how I feel about it, if I'm just being 100% honest. And does it stink? Yeah. Was he great at Notre Dame? Yeah. Does it suck that he went to USC? Yeah, it does. The fact of the matter is he's gone. I mean, we could be upset about it all we want to, but he's not going to come back, because he's going to be like, man, there are some really disgruntled Notre Dame fans that I left. I should probably move back to South Bend. It's just not going to happen, right? So, look, here's the thing. Like, he's been quoted at saying a bunch of different things. It's the happiest he's been in a while, and he's happy to be where he's at, and it just means more, and all this other stuff like that. I mean, look, here's how I am. Even if he meant it in the context that it's being portrayed, which he wasn't, I still don't care, man. Like, nobody's going to stay at Notre Dame forever. And so at the end of the day, like I've said before, the only thing that I didn't like is I didn't like that it was the day before Junior Day.
Sure.
That
and
is
right
the
before
only
signing day, which, I guess doesn't really matter as much because they weren't going to sign anybody.
But that's the only part of it that I don't like. But on your way out the door, like, if you want to say some things, and I think this is the other side of the coin of that, like, I never had a conversation with this guy. On your way out the door, regardless of what you say, it doesn't really bother me, because you're on your way out the door. Like, that's cool, man. Like, say whatever you need to. But at the end of the day, to answer your question in short, Brian, no, like I said, I don't think there's anything to interpret. It's just listening to the whole thing. We're
going to go in a completely different direction now with this next one, Trevor.
Question from Baldpeen Shillelagh. If you either had to eat, okay, we are going in a different direction. Okay. If you either had to only eat vegan or only animal products for the next year, which would you choose? That's the easiest answer.
I literally have never had an answer that's easier for me to do than this one. It's absolutely animal. I mean, I've already had eggs and dairy, and I'll probably be having salmon for dinner tonight. I mean, I would eat only animal products. And I'm not like on this carnivore diet. I had a turkey sandwich for lunch yesterday. My wife and I were going to have raviolis last night. And so every time because I didn't have time we had a Bible group last night we had to go to at the church. And so, like, when our show was over, I didn't have time to make like fresh spaghetti sauce, because that's a time consuming thing. So she just took some cans and made a spaghetti sauce. But then when we do that, though, we'll take some ground beef and cook the ground beef and put some garlic in there, because, like, we like the meat sauce in it. And so I had some beef last night with my raviolis. And so, I definitely would be a very easy answer to that. So I'm glad I don't have to choose either, because I do need some vegetables and all that. But definitely meat. That's an easy one. Definitely an easy one.
I'd rather just starve than just only be vegan. Look, man, and if you are vegan, that's cool. Like, I'm never one to judge somebody else's lifestyle, but for me specifically, if somebody said that I couldn't have meat, eggs, or dairy, pass. I've lived a good life up to this point. I'll just starve. I lived a good
question. I should know the answer to this, but I don't. What's the difference between a vegan and a vegetarian?
Vegans don't eat anything that comes from, like, animals. Like, they don't touch it.
So
like
a vegetarian glass of milk, or like, okay, interesting.
Okay. But vegans are like, nothing that comes from animal-based products. Like, there's some that go even as extreme as, like, there's some ingredients in like gummy bears that come from animals, and like they won't even they wouldn't touch it. Like it's crazy.
Okay.
I mean, it's
Interesting.
Yep, it is
Not
what
me.
it is.
You know, I'm always open-minded to certain things, but not all things.
No, I'll eat meat off the bone, and I like my steak still mooing.
Yeah. When I first got married, Angela liked well-done steaks. And I mean, like, if you're going to err on the side of it, err on the side of charring it, not being undercooked. So I've got her now down to mediums. But if it's anything medium rare, she's like, nope. I mean, she doesn't just send stuff back at restaurants. She'll have me throw her steak back on. They're like, yeah, that's not done enough. You know, so like when I put a steak, when I take it off and I start letting it rest and the juices start coming out, and if it's red at all, I'm like, okay, man, we got to throw that back on the grill for another couple minutes for her. But yeah, my mom's like you are, Trev. She's that way. I'm medium. I can do a medium rare. I could do it one. I could do a medium that leans towards medium rare. I don't think I could do a pure medium rare steak. I don't like it quite as much. It's good to know. So if I ever have you over for a steak this summer, I have to. And when you do a little cookout this summer, that's good to know.
You got
good
it.
To know. All right, good questions here today. I've really enjoyed this this one. So let's go here from Salty.
What changes do you expect to see in Denbrock's offense this season?
Well, someone we talked a little bit about yesterday, Trevor. Like we expect to see the vertical game used a little bit more than it was last year. I think we'll see the intermediate part of the pass game impacted more with route concepts that I know Denbrock likes. He likes the corner. He likes smash concepts. We didn't see that a ton this year. I just don't know that they had the personnel that was great at it. I do think the play against USC, the way Mitchell Evans ran the route still leaves a little bit of uncertainty for me if it was a corner, a smash, or if it was a slot fade, just because he ran the route funky. But the way that Riley threw the ball makes me think it was actually a corner route. But we saw them hit a smash route early to Cooper Flanagan against A&M. But I don't know that Riley loved throwing smash, and I don't know that they saw a ton of coverages that made smash great. I think if they're effective throwing the ball more next year, that we will see more smash type of stuff. Now, their snag concept has a little bit of the smash sort of principles in it. Snag is essentially the outside guy works inside over top of the number 2 defender and then kind of sits like an option route. The number 2 guy will run a corner, and then you've got a running back that will run a swing. You will hit the corner route in that concept. Most teams that teach snag, it's either the snag or the swing. Or sometimes they'll run a slide. It's usually that. But at times, depending on the look you get, especially if you get like an aggressive press man and you like that corner matchup, you may just say, hey, look, I'm throwing here. I'm reading it. I'm throwing it here because I've got the look I want. There's no safety help, or the safety's over here, and so I'm going to hit that route. But usually that corner is kind of more of a clear out type of route, especially when they run it into the boundary than it is anything else. But I think we'll see that. We didn't see a ton of outcuts out of this offense. I think we'll see more of that next year. We've seen that more in Denbrock's past. Riley was not a huge fan of throwing up the seam on verts. He was more reading it outside. I think we'll see more of that next season with Eli Raritan and Jaden Greathouse. Run game wise, we're going to see some variations that are geared towards protecting the edge a little better on the zone, or a little differently on the zones, because you don't have Riley sort of protecting that with his legs as much anymore. So I think those will be some variations. I won't be shocked if we see them go under center a little bit in certain situations, in certain looks. I do think we could see a little bit of that next year. You'd be silly to put Riley Leonard under center because you take away his running ability. I mean, but I think that we've seen Denbrock at LSU at times and at Cincinnati at times will go under center in certain looks. I could certainly see that. I'm not guaranteeing it, but I could see that. And I think we'll see a little bit more variation in the run game. I think they'll have some type of pin and pull concepts that they'll use a little bit more next year to get the ball outside. So I think those will all be things that we see more of next year. Is that fair, Trev? I mean, I think those are some of the changes that we'll see.
The only other thing that I would add would be slip screens to running backs. But
that's because the drop back game being more part of it. Yeah. which is, as we talked about last week, you can't really run a ton of slip screens when you don't drop back and throw the ball a whole lot.
Right.
Good question. Here we go.
Michael Kostrup. Pate suggested a revenue sharing scheme whereby players earn more if they've been with the program longer. Do you think that helped make players think harder about transferring?
Certainly help, but it would have to be a system where there's the only way that would work, and I'd be curious what he said about the entire thing, is if the way that I think they should do the rev share is that there's basically trying to think of the way to say this. You're basically locked into what you can make, essentially, as opposed to a quarterback saying, "Hey, I deserve this. I deserve a 3-year contract for $5 million or something like that." It's more of like, "Hey, freshmen earn this much, second-year players earn this much, third-year players earn this much, fourth-year players earn this much." I don't care if you're third string or your first string. That's just how it is. Now, your extra money comes from NIL deals. That's how you get the extra money. But just the rev share part of it is just locked in. If we've got $20 million to spend on the football team, that $20 million is being split between, everyone evenly based on first year, second year, third year, fourth year. And then you're getting extra money because you signed a deal with the Honda dealership down the street who's going to pay you $500,000, and you're going to drive one of their cars and do some commercials. That's how your extra money comes from. That's how I think it should be. That's NIL. That's a name, image, likeness. Not just like, "Hey, we want you to come play for us. Here's $5 million. What do I got to do? Cash the check. That's what you got to do. That's how I think it should be. So if he's talking about that, then I would agree with him. But at the end of the day, if it's not locked in, then it won't matter if you're a freshman, sophomore, senior. In fact, if it's not locked in, then you're going to see younger players making more than veterans because the younger players are negotiating those deals out of high school. You got to do that just to get them to come. So that's the reality of it.
I'd like a revenue sharing scheme based on merit, not duration. I mean, this is coming from somebody who has a sales background where it's like, you're rewarded and compensated for the amount of work that you put in. Not saying that somebody that's been with a program for 4 years doesn't put in as much work, say, off the field, but let's call a spade here. You have players that, like a Ryan Williams, wasn't the only true freshman wide receiver at Alabama, but he did more for that team than other true freshman wide receivers at Alabama. Mm-hmm. So him making the same amount of money as somebody that didn't play a snap is what it is. Like, if that's how I view it.
My thing is more like, okay, you're in sales, so you know that there's people in sales that like, hey, look, everybody makes this salary, right? You're going to make your money off commissions off of your then your sales, right? So like, there's businesses where like everybody, like it's like being a server. Everybody makes $5 an hour, but the people that really do a good job get the tips. That's where I'm saying is like the rev share part should be just, this is what all the freshmen make. This is what all the sophomore makes. Then a guy like Ryan Williams then makes his extra money based off the NIL piece. He signs this deal. He signs that deal. He signs that deal because he's more marketable because of the performance that he had. So that's where I think you get both. That's the thing for me is, and I think the split thing also helps to create sort of a better locker room situation, which matters to me. Hey, look, man, I'm the running backs coach. I don't determine what you make. You're a sophomore. This is what all sophomores make. Well, coach, I want some more. All right, cool. Then let me call my buddy, in the NIL office, and then we'll work on getting you some NIL deals. That's where I'm coming. So there's two aspects of the revenue. There's the rev share, which I think should be more equitable. The
base salary.
And then there's the NIL, which is more based on merit, more based on production, more based on marketability.
Sure.
That is kind of how I think it. That's my vision of it. Not there's just one pool of money and you get the same even if you're a Heisman candidate compared to your third stringer. Does that make sense? That's kind of how I view it.
Totally. I was answering.
I'm having a fun discussion. Like, we don't have to agree with the same thing. I'm simply saying, like, I agree with you that there should be a level of the best players should make more money. I'm just saying I think it should happen this way, not that way. That's all. Your point's very fair.
No, I like it. I mean, the revenue sharing is your base salary, and all nil is essentially like the commission, sticking with the sales analogy. Yeah. Yep.
Let me go down to here. I want to try to find somebody I haven't had yet. Here's one. Let's go, Nick.
If the starting quarterback comes down to CJ or Kenny, does the runner-up become the backup, or does Steve keep that spot?
Well, Nick, I think that answer depends on who's still on the roster. So what I mean by that is, does the runner-up stay? Because if it comes down to, let's say that the battle is really between CJ and Kenny and Steve's third, just to honor your question, the backup should be the guy that finishes number 2, as long as he's still on the roster. The reason that I think that Steve would become the backup is because I think in that scenario, the number 2 who loses the job would leave. Part of that depends on when that job is determined. If the job is determined at the end of the spring, then I think it's a pretty good bet that that kid's going to leave. If the job is not decided until August, then I don't see, like, let's just say hypothetically that CJ Carr and Kenny Minchey battle it out all the way into the fall, and all 3 of those guys come back in the fall and they all battle it out. I from what I know of Kenny Minchey and CJ Carr, both of them, I'd be shocked if the kid that loses that battle just quits the team and takes a year off. I'm shocked. That's not who they are, in my opinion. I think that guy would stay and be the backup and be ready, just like Rocco Spindler did, just like Junior Chilamaka did, just like Pat Coogan did. Like, wait your turn, and when it's your time, you'll get your shot. But so I think the timing of that determines that. But in my opinion, if one guy has clearly shown himself to be the second best quarterback on the roster, he should be the backup if they're all still on the roster. But I could see a scenario where Steve becomes the backup if that guy that loses the job leaves.
This is an interesting question, because I'm not like Steve is a really good backup. Like, he's a guy that would come in a pinch, and in those situations, you know what you would be getting. I don't know. That's interesting. I don't know who.
But if it's a long-term injury, you'd want to make sure that the guy that is the second best starting option has gotten that work, and he would need to be the backup to get that. But you are correct. Steve Angeli is a really good backup quarterback.
I think it would be almost the same conversation we had this year when Riley got hurt against Northern Illinois. Like, if he gets hurt in a game, you put in Steve. If he gets hurt for the rest of the season, then I think, like, you look at
a month.
Yeah. Sure. That if he gets hurt for a longer duration of time, then you look to put in the higher ceiling person. So I think that's what's interesting, because I think you could have the same, like, let's just say for argument's sake, if CJ wins the starting job, I think Steve would still be the number 2. But if something happens with his elbow again, or who knows, and he has to miss a month, I think then you put in Kenny. But if CJ gets evaluated for a concussion, like what Riley Leonard did in the Orange Bowl, I think then you put in Steve.
I get that. I would still say if Kenny Minchey proved himself to be the number 2 guy, he should be the number 2 guy. I think also your scenario would be even more likely, where I could really get into that, if Kenny won the job. Like, Kenny's a junior now. Like, if he's not ready to be my off the bench guy now, then he's not going to be my number 2 in the battle. He would have fallen behind Steve.
Sure. So
it's not an easy answer, because again, if we didn't know what Steve has done off the bench, this answer would be very different. But that, to your point, that we have seen Steve come off of the bench in those situations and show a lot of calm and poise, and that's what makes it difficult to answer this one, I think, how I normally would. Here's a bummer of a question, but a good one from Laker Irish.
What's your biggest letdown game in the past decade? Mine's got to be Miami 2017. Oh.
That is a very good one. Oh boy. I still look back at that 2015 Stanford game. And that was a brutal one, the way that one ended. Scoring with like 31 seconds left, and then still to take a 2-point lead and then still losing, or take a 1-point lead and still losing. I still say, wonder if Notre Dame would have been able to make the playoff. Would they have leaped back ahead of Oklahoma in 2015 if they would have had that win over Stanford? Been interesting. Because remember, they were in the top 4, and then they had those really ugly wins over Wake and BC. They fell to 5. If they'd have gone on the road and beat a top 5 Stanford team or top 10 Stanford team, I think that jumps them back up. But that was a bad one. The 19 Michigan game was brutal.
That
was really bad. As far as like a letdown game, that was awful. I think a lot of Notre Dame fans have like eliminated that from their memory. I know of very few Notre Dame fans that actually talk about that game. I really think a lot of us have just kind of gotten it out of our minds, just pretend it never happened.
That game for me is Miami 2017. That's been completely cut from my memory. That is one of 2 games I've ever turned off and never finished. It takes a lot. Yeah, it takes a lot for me to not.
2019 Michigan was that way?
19 Michigan was that way. 17 Miami was that way. Those are the 2 games that I ever just refused to finish watching because it was to the point I was like, this is just disgusting. There's going to be no redeeming quality of finishing watching this. There's nothing to take away.
Yeah.
It's all right. Yeah. It's just time to go on with Saturday night because there was going to be nothing that, didn't even finish watching them.
Yeah. That's an interesting one. Tulsa, 2010 jumps in my mind. That was one.
Gosh. Yeah, if we're going that far,
you know what might be the biggest one? South Florida 2011. Yep, you said it. You said it, Trev. Because I had such high hopes for that team. I mean, think about that team. You're going into the year. Dane Chris is back, and Dane had played pretty well, I thought, in 2010 before his injury.
Yeah.
You think now, a year to the offense, we're going to get a lot more performances like the Michigan State game than we will, the Navy game or whatever. But you had Michael Floyd coming back. You had Kyle Rudolph coming back. You had Sear Wood. You had Theo Riddick. You had Jonas Gray. You had Zach Martin, Chris Watt. I mean, your whole offensive line basically was coming back in 2011. And you had, defensively, you had Harrison Smith, Manti, Cap. You had Ethan Johnson coming back. You had Darius Fleming, Steve Filer, Robert Blanton, Gary Gray, Darren Walls was gone in 2010. But man, Jamor Slaughter was back. I mean, that team was so loaded. You had some stud freshmen, Aaron Lynch, Stephon Tuitt were on that team. Man, I thought that team was going to be so good. And just right away, you're like, this is going to suck. That, how demoralizing is it that in week 1, you just know your team is going to suck? People talk about the Northern Illinois game. Northern Illinois was a way better team than South Florida. Way better. South Florida did not even have a winning record that year. They were terrible. And Notre Dame, that was way worse than Northern Illinois. And I thought that team was going to be good. So good in 2011. So good.
I'm trying to think of other
Boston College of 1993 is just, in my entire life, as far as a letdown, 93 BC is. I just popped in my head. 93 BC is my biggest letdown ever. Because you're just, dude, we're 1 game away from playing for the title again. We just beat Florida State and lost that game. Yeah,
I think one of them up there for me is, honestly, it's another one that gets not talked about as much as 23 Clemson. Down 8 starters.
Yeah.
Clemson's down 8 stars. And it was just an ugly game. It's just, I understand you were playing at Death Valley. You're playing there at noon. Come on, man. You're playing there in the middle of the day. That one was really bad. 19. For me, 17 Miami, 19 Michigan still take the cake. There's been others in there, but the other letdown games were just also a part of just not good seasons overall. 17, you were making the bounce back. 19, you were a year removed from an undefeated season. Like, I'm not
That's why
counting anything.
2011 hurt so much more
Yeah.
than like Tulsa or Navy in 2010. Because you're like, yeah, I don't know how good they're going to be. But like this one was more of like, man, this is going to be like, man, this is really tough. This is really tough. Yeah. But yeah, that South Florida game, because like you just knew right then, like this season's going to be rough.
My
And
parents.
how does it feel to like know after one game that your season's over? Like you say, well, you knew Northern Illinois after week 2. No, not really. The circumstances are completely different. You had the win over Texas to A&M, so you knew this team had a chance to be good. But then also back then, Trev, it was a BCS game. You had to be number 1 or 2 to have a shot to compete for the title. Like if Notre Dame was in an era where this is the modern BCS, yeah, the Northern Illinois game would have been even more crushing because your season's over in week 2, like literally over in week 2. But that wasn't the case in a 12-team playoff year for me. So that's why it's a little bit different for me. A little bit different for me.
And in the season they lost in Northern Illinois, they still made it to the Natty. So, yeah.
Correct. Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Let's get to a happier topic. Let me see here. All right. Here's a decent one from Ian Johnston.
Ian Johnston. Next season, will Notre Dame have a championship game wrecker at every position group? I think the only questionable ones are interior D-line and kick and punt returners.
I think Notre Dame could have kick and punt return game. I mean, look, if all they did for the punt return or kick return was put Jadarian Price back there, you have don't you have that in that situation? Punt returner, I think there's some guys that could be that. Maybe Jordan Faison, maybe Dallas Golden. There's guys you could put back there. I think they could potentially have game breakers, especially kick returner, because we've literally seen Jadarian Price be that guy. D tackle, I agree with you at. Game breaker, quarterback, they have the talent, but I don't know that we'll necessarily see that consistently in 2025. Running back, they have 4. Receiver, game breaker. Like, do you I guess it would determine what you mean by game breaker. I don't count Jaden Greathouse as a game breaker from a speed standpoint, but as he showed against Ohio State, he's a playmaker. I think Malachi Fields could be that. So I'll say that. Tight end, yes. Offensive line, yes. Defensive end, several. Linebacker, several. Corner, several. Safety. Safety's a question. Well, because I don't know that I would say Adon Schuler is a game breaker per se, but he's really good. No, I'll say he could be. Yeah, I'll say every position except D tackle. I'll say that's fair. And I would include that they do have some potential in the return game. Potential-wise. They got to prove it, but the potential's there.
Yeah, for me, I still think tight end room's a little bit of a question. I do. I just overall health. The potential of the room is there, but I don't know if I would consider them like game breakers yet. I got to see the production ramp up.
Yeah, I guess I took that a different way, Trevor, is I took that as, do they have guys that can be? Because like receiver is a no if it's talking about proven, right? Safety's a no if we're talking about proven, because I wouldn't put Adon yet in the Xavier Watts category. I think any of the linebackers have proven to be game breakers yet. So I think tight end has to prove more, but I think they have a game breaker in the room is kind of look at it. So if you're going to say proven, then my answer changes a little bit. It does. And I would say there's less, my answer's a lot less on that. But I think it's the potential. Do they have a championship game breaker at every position? They have one. They're not all proven. And so that's a good distinction that you're making there, except D tackle. I don't think they have a guy there.
Yeah, I'm with you on D tackle. What did happen with Cam Williams from Nick?
Just raw. That's really what it comes down to. Just can you put him on the field for a team that's trying to do what Notre Dame's trying to do and not really know what he's going to give you. I think it was just about just being raw, not really knowing how to play, not knowing how to execute the offense, and feeling like you were at least good enough at receiver with the type of offense you were running that you didn't have to put him into that situation. He's just very raw. And that's what I've been told by multiple people. Like the talent's there, but he's just really raw as far as how just knowing just little things, like getting off the line in a certain way. Like, well, can't you put him on there and run a go route as long as nobody presses him? He does not attack leverage. He does a lot of those things. He's still learning a lot of that stuff. Still learning. There's a couple questions in here, Trevor, from like Luke Breeding. What's your opinion on Larry Porter as a running backs coach? He wasn't retained by Belichick. Another question down here was about thoughts on Stan Drayton. Another question about Tony Alford. So I kind of do all those at once. Larry Porter, I don't know a lot about Larry Porter. I know he's got a long reputation of being a running backs coach. I'm pulling up his resume. Obviously, being at North Carolina this past year, he oversaw the coaching of Maureen Hampton. That's pretty good. I mean, that I give him a plus there. I just don't know a lot about him in regard to like what kind of recruiter he is. He's a longtime running backs coach. He has experience. He was at Texas in 2013. He was the recruiting coordinator at Auburn for 4 years. So I don't know if like is he actually a really good running backs coach and also a great recruiter, or is he more of a he's more of a recruiter who you just kind of let coach the running backs because you got to put him somewhere. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know enough about him, so I can't really speak on Larry Porter. But the fact that he coached Maureen Hampton the last couple of years, if there was interest there, is at least worth a conversation to me, because I think Maureen Hampton was really good and played the game the right way. Stan Drayton, I know a lot more about him. Obviously, he was the head coach at Temple. Did not succeed at all at Temple, but don't care. Like, what you did as a head coach is irrelevant to me as a position coach in regard to your success. Great reputation. I mean, he coached at Ohio State for the year that they won the title. So obviously there'll be that sort of attraction because Marcus Freeman seems to like that at times. And known as a good coach, known as a good position coach. He's been coaching the NFL. I think he was with the Bears at one point in time. Hold on, let me look up Stan Drayton's resume. I believe Stan Drayton was with the Bears at one point in time as a coach. But he's an older guy. He's in his 50s, like Dylan. He was the running back coach at Texas for 4 years. He was with the Bears in 15 and 16. He was with Ohio State from 11 to 14. He's coached at Florida under Urban Meyer. So he coached with Urban. That's how he got here. Coached at Tennessee back in the 2000s. Coached with Spurrier. That's actually with Urban also. So I would say like the resume's good. The reputation is strong. I've heard a lot of good things about him over the years as a position coach, which matters to me. I don't know what kind of recruiter he is. And I'm not saying he's not a good recruiter. I'm saying I genuinely just don't know what kind of recruiter he is. But he did recruit Ezekiel Elliott. And, and that may seem like a no-brainer, but Notre Dame told Ezekiel Elliott they liked him in the secondary. Yeah. Yeah. They told him he was a DB. Just like when I laughed when people were like, you need to bring Autry Denson back. And I was like, look, Autry Denson was a great player at Notre Dame, and I'm sure he's a good guy. But he was a very, very bad recruiter. This is the same guy who told A.J. Dillon that you are a linebacker for us. Yeah. 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 The Notre Dame coaches were pissed when they found that out. They tried to, smooth it over, but it was too late. Yeah, he said, you can't play running back for me. You're a linebacker here. Even – this was after the Irish invasion camp when he outran in the 50-yard dash every running back at camp. He was number one. And Autry Denson said, no, you can't play running back for me. Yeah, so those things matter. So, yeah, Notre Dame at one point in time told Ezekiel Elliott that, yes, you're a DB for us. Because he liked Notre Dame. DB. Yep. And then as far as Tony Alford, which that was from Woody, asked that question about Stan Drayton. Tony Alford, look, if Tony Alford had interest in coming to Notre Dame, I absolutely would bring him in. I mean, I've shared that he'd be the first call that I would make. He's got history at Notre Dame. He's been on some good football teams. Obviously, he was at Ohio State for a long time. He's a guy that was at Michigan this past year. Team wasn't great, but they beat Ohio State. So he's a good recruiter. He's a very good position coach. He's a mentor. So he checks all those boxes as well. Look, but he made more than Dylan McCullough made. At Michigan, he made more than what Dylan made. There's probably going to be a significant buyout there. I don't know if financially it would make sense, or not even make sense, if it would be doable. That'd be my question. Because I would assume that not only do you have to pay him close to $1 million, which in today's era, I don't care about paying an assistant coach about $1 million. It is what it is. That's going to happen anyway. If you think you get the right coach, then go do it. But I would assume there's going to be some sort of buyout involved also. And with what's going on with the salaries that you got to pay players coming up, you're not going to want to spend $1 million or $500,000 or $250,000 on a buyout when I can just go get this other running backs coach who's also very good, who's unemployed or has a much different buyout, So that's kind of how I look at it. But if he was interested and they wanted to make the money work, absolutely, I would give him a call. Now, is there a chance he comes back? That I don't know. He may love it at Michigan. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But I think you'd be crazy not to call him and talk to him and see what kind of interest level is there.
A DB? I'm sorry. I can't get over that.
I could see you. You have tuned me out for the last 5 minutes since I said that. Yes. Ezekiel. Now, he probably doesn't pick Notre Dame, but he was interested in Notre Dame. And the Notre Dame coaches, and it wasn't Tony Alford, I don't believe, because it was more of the recruiting coordinator and the regional coach. They told him he projected as more of a DB at Notre Dame than a running back. Yeah, true story. I got told that by a coach at Notre Dame. 2 actually told me that. Yeah, that's funny. So is this true? Les Miles only wanted to recruit Jamar Chase as a DB.
Yep,
and told him that. Wow.
Yep, that is true.
That is nuts. Like, that's a fireable offense.
Yeah, it was something like he only wanted him to play DB, and if he was going to play on the offensive side of the ball, they would have made him a running back because he's like 6 foot, like 200 pounds. Yeah.
Oh boy, that is pretty dumb. Yeah, but it shows you. I mean, good coaches make this dumb mistakes like that all the time. You just hope that you don't make it very often because that's a holy moly.
Question in here from Lauren Hamilton. I wonder where Hebert ranks in arm strength with the QBs we have.
He has the strongest arm from a potential standpoint. His arm isn't as strong as Kenny's is right now. It's close to CJ's, but it's Kenny going into year 3. I would say his arm is arguably as strong, if not stronger, than Kenny's was coming out of high school. It was a little stronger than CJ's was coming out of high school, just as far as power. But the thing that hurts, you could make a case he has the strongest arm now. The reason I'm hedging my bet a little bit is because his footwork keeps him from driving the ball consistently the way he's capable of. So that would be my one kind of, he's not there yet. But if it's just everything's right and he steps right, you could argue he's got the strongest arm on the roster right now. I think you could argue that. But he's got to clean up that technique. Definitely got to clean up that technique. Here's another quarterback question here from Laker Irish.
How early do staffs start looking at quarterback prospects? Is it earlier than for other positions?
I mean, it is to a degree. It honestly depends on how far ahead are you in recruiting. So, like right now, Gino Guidugli spent the entire week last week going to see 2027 quarterbacks. I think Max Bulla saw a couple 2027 linebackers. There was a couple times where there was a 27 kid in the area that they were already going to that they wanted to try and see, but it wasn't a priority. Gino only went and saw 2027 quarterbacks, and they are already looking at 2028 quarterbacks. Why? Because they already got their 2026 quarterback, and they've had him for several months. They got him over a half a year ago. So it just depends on but I do like the fact that Notre Dame's being a little methodical, though, with that. They're not rushing to get a guy too early. They're letting things develop, and some kids don't like that, and that's fine, but they're taking their time a little bit with that. But nowadays, that's probably the position that you go earliest because teams are getting their quarterbacks a lot earlier than they used to. I do want to address this. It's from Salty. Says, now that National Signing Day is over, do you expect Mr. Blanchard will soon announce that he will accept the GM offer? I think, Salty, you might have missed this, but It was announced earlier today that James Blanchard is going to stay at Texas Tech. I put an intel piece on the message board about it. All I can say is that I do believe that if not for some unfortunate and tragic situations that came up after his interview, that he would have probably taken the job at Notre Dame. I'll say probably is me being as light on it as because I don't want to be dogmatic and say I know for a fact he would have taken the job. I can't be that dogmatic. I'm quite confident he would have taken the job had this situation not came up, and he had to make a decision as a husband and a father that I pray I never have to make. And I'll just say this and leave it here, because some things are not our business. I know what happened. I will just leave it here. My respect for James Blanchard as a man grew exponentially in the last 24 hours. Because sometimes what you want to do, you can't do because your priority has to always be your family first. And I'll just leave it at that and just say that had that not happened, I believe that James Blanchard is the GM at Notre Dame. I do believe that. I'm not saying that definitively, but I do absolutely believe that. So, if you want a little bit more, and I don't give the specific reason on the message board because, again, that's a family matter that's not our business. But I'll just say that I'm quite confident that the reports that Notre Dame didn't have the highest offer, I believe those to be absolutely erroneous. The contract that they announced today, a 3-year extension for $1.5 million, which basically means he's making a little over $500,000 a year. I'm quite confident, based on what I've heard on both sides of this, that Notre Dame's offer was substantially bigger than that. I was told he was comfortable with the way that they were going to work together in a partnership. It really came down to, on the verge of him finalizing everything, something happened in his family that kept it from being, and it's nothing nefarious. It's something sad and tragic that's made him say, I gotta put my family's needs first. And that's why he didn't take the job, and just leave it at that. But I think had that not happened, I have no doubt that he would have taken the job at Notre Dame. And that's what took so long for it to happen, is because this had to get dealt with. And I respect the way that he handled it and the constant communication. And I have a lot more respect. I always, everything I've heard about him is good, but what I've heard the last 24 hours makes me have a great deal of respect, more respect for him as a person, on top of the job. Because all I knew about him before was just the job he did, which was excellent. And I think if he would have much rather those things not have happened, and then he could have made the decision that he made on a clean slate. But it just was one of those things where it was unfortunate, but it was he made the hard decision, but it was the right one, in my view. I would have hoped that I would have had the courage to make the same decision he made. Because, as I've said to you before, Trev, there's nothing more important to me in my life than being a good husband, because that's what God calls me to be, first and foremost. If I run the best Irish Breakdown website and podcast on the planet, and I kneel before God at the end of all things, and he's like, yeah, but you were a terrible absentee husband. Yeah, but my website rocked. Don't care. I called you to first and foremost be a godly husband. And I think James Blanchard put that ahead of what was maybe best for him career-wise. And I don't know how you can't respect that. And I understand why a lot of you don't know what happened. I totally get it. But in this case, I would hope that some of you will just trust me a little bit on this one, because you all know I don't just believe everything I'm told. You all know that. Just trust me that if you knew what I knew, you would, number one, you'd keep James and his family in your prayers. And number two, you'd be like, you know what? That's a good dude. I respect that. And then when now we move on and see who the next candidates are going to be. I don't know who that's going to be. I've been given a few names of potential candidates. There's one name out there that I've heard that I don't believe is a legitimate candidate. There's a couple others that I've heard that are, but I'm not ready to put their names out just yet, because I don't know if they're definitely where Marcus Freeman's going to go. I do know this, though, that there are a couple candidates that Marcus Freeman had in mind if Blanchard said no. So Marcus Freeman is not kind of caught with his pants down. Like, I don't know what to do now. I thought we were going to get James Blanchard. I don't know who I'm going to turn to. I think the pivot will be clean, but I also think that the priorities right now are more towards replacing Dylan McCullough first, then making this move is what I was told is the priority right now. And because now you're in a little bit of a dead period. So, yeah. All right. And we got last couple here, Trev, and then we will get out of here. So let me go to, see here. It's a good one.
Where do you think Bronte Johnson best projects with his skill set? Safety, nickel, or corner? From Wyatt.
I still think Wyatt. I still think it's safety. I think he's rangy. I think he's fast. I think it's a position where he shows me some good instincts. I think he can flip his hips and run and play corner, but I don't know that that's his best position. And I don't know that it's his best position if playing pure man. If Chris Ash is running the coverages he ran at Ohio State, then Bronte would be able to fit at corner a little bit better because they ran a lot of cover 3. But if Notre Dame maintains being a heavy man team, I don't know that corner's his best spot. But honestly, I think he could play any of those positions. But if I were to say to rank them in what I think he'd do best, I'd say safety, boundary corner, nickel right now would be where I'd put him. And I'm torn between nickel and corner being number 2. But I think safety is definitely his best position. Definitely his best position.
Eric Radford, does the number 3 uniform number still hold any significance? Seems post Michael Floyd, it has gone more to role players.
I don't know that I would say that it's gone to. I mean, I don't know that CJ Sanders wore number 3, correct? I don't know that he was a guy.
CJ Sanders was number 9.
Number 9. Trying to think who's been number 3 at Notre Dame. Let's go here and see who the recent number 3s are. Jalen Sneed is number 3.
Jabron Payne's number 3.
Yeah, I mean,
in previous years, Houston Griffith was.
I mean, Houston wasn't recruited to be a role player. I mean, he was a pretty highly ranked recruit coming out of high school. To answer your question, however, no, CJ Sanders was number 3.
He was?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. And then he changed to number 1. He was number 3 his first 2 years, and then he changed to number 1 at SMU. So, but yeah, he was number 3. Now maybe he was
I could have
number 9 as a freshman,
number 9.
But he was number 3 in 16 and 17. So, but yeah. But let me see here. Notre Dame, Stanford highlights 2015, because maybe he was 9 as a freshman, Trev, and then just switched to 3 after that. And that's why you're remembering, because you're remembering some plays. But we'll look here real quick. I still remember that kick return. I was in the stadium that day. I was covering the game that day. And he was 9 as a freshman, Trev. So I'm watching the kick return he had against Stanford. He was 9 as a freshman. And then moved to 3. So you were both right. He was there. But I remember Stanford going right down the field and just like it was nothing scoring on Notre Dame. And then CJ immediately took that next kick back, and you're like, okay, there you go.
Maybe there's just, maybe it's just because I don't know a whole lot of Notre Dame players pre like 05, but I know Joe Montana wore number 3, but was it really like that prolific of a number?
It was. A lot of quarterbacks ran it, like Arnez Battle. I mean, yeah, it wasn't like it wasn't quite what it was made to be like, but for a long time, Ron Paulus got number 3. I mean, that was kind of the thing when he came to Notre Dame. He's the next great quarterback and that kind of thing. So, I mean, yeah, there was definitely a time where number 3 definitely meant something, especially if you were a quarterback. I mean, Rick Meyer was number 3. I mean, you were seeing a lot of those guys wearing that number. So it was just, it's like if, wearing number 7, if you were, Broncos, it just meant something. Now, again, you weren't wearing number 7 after John Elway left because NFL teams retired numbers. But yeah, for a long time. But Trevor, it hasn't been that for a while.
I was going to say, because I know like in my lifetime, it was, I mean, Darius Walker was number 3 and Michael Floyd was number 3. But then like after that, it was, you know.
Yeah, it was definitely a little bit different. I mean, Michael Floyd wore, I think, 80 in high school, but it's a cool number. But it was always, even with Michael Floyd and Darius Walker, it was kind of a number that was given to a prominent player, but it wasn't like it used to be where it was like a quarterback and that kind of thing.
Gotcha.
So, yeah. So I think that's a good one to end on, Trevor. I think that'll wrap things up. Let me just make sure there was nothing put up here really quick. And yeah, looks good. So I think that'll do it, man. Why don't you take us out of here? We'll be back Monday, everybody. Go ahead and take us out of here, Trev.
You got it, man. Well, hey, thank you guys for being with us. Really, really good submissions today. A lot of good conversations came out of it. But before you head out of here, be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and your family. Whatever platform you guys watch us on, whether it is Spotify Podcasts or Apple Podcasts, please be sure to leave us a 5-star review. We'd greatly appreciate it. And, of course, the best way to support what we do here at Irish Breakdown is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So for Brian, I'm Trevor. We'll see you back here very soon on the Irish Breakdown podcast.